Okay, good evening members. It's 6:30. Welcome to this evening's meeting of Community, Environment and Partnerships. We have, as well as the committee members, 2 visiting members and 3 portfolio holders, all of whom will appear at the appropriate point. And we have indeed also apologies for absence and substitutions. So apology for absence from Councillor Stephen Day. Substitutions, we have an apology from Councillor Jones, replaced by Councillor Harvey, and an apology from Councillor Hussey, replaced by Councillor Michael Bound. So welcome to you two. Any declarations of interest? No? No declarations? Any nomination for Vice Chairman? No. There are no urgent matters. So that brings us to the minutes of the committee meeting held on the 16th of September, which are in the pack for this meeting. Is everyone content that they're correct? I will sign them at the end. Thank you very much. Which brings us on to the first main item tonight, smoking near children's play areas. On my left, we have Councillor Cathy Osserton, portfolio holder, who is going to introduce this. And as you may have gathered, not Marianne Short, who's the relevant officer, but she's unable to be here tonight, so Richard Wareham, who's also here for the next meeting, is substituting for us. So do ask lots of awkward questions. No, I tested him out on Monday. He does seem to know the answers to the questions, so that should be fine. But Cathy, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Is that on? Yeah. As you can all probably remember from CEP, that we did have a visit from a university professor from Southampton earlier last year, and at a meeting in 2014 the Community Environment and Partnership Committee identified the issue of smoking near children's play areas. It has been raised that a number of local authorities were attempting to dissuade people from smoking near play areas, either through signs, local bylaws, but this is not the preferred option, as there is a smoking near children's play areas, either through signs, local bylaws, but this is not the preferred option, as there is a protracted administrative process, as bylaws need to be approved by the Secretary of State, and also where you put into force a bylaw, they need to be enforced and to be looked at. There would also be the intent to enforce. Residents feel that given the borough's ban on glass, dog, bikes and litter from children's play areas, we should also ban cigarettes. There are demonstrable scientifically proven damages to passive smoking, particularly among children, and I myself have seen this with small children with having eye problems and upper respiratory tract infections, and it's not very pleasant. We then looked at the Health Act for 2006. I won't read it out because it is actually in your document, but it does say that there are banned to enclose public premises, but there's nothing really in the Act that says that we can enforce or do anything with open spaced areas. It would appear that local authorities who are already operating a no-smoking policy in or near play parks have done so by introducing a voluntary code being introduced in partnership with the community or with the NHS. This type of code does not have any legal effect and is based on goodwill and morality. We undertook a public consultation over a period of 3 months. We had 350 responses received, and of those, 96 agreed that children should be protected from passive smoking. 88% agreed that there should be a voluntary ban on tobacco and cigarette smoking within 10 metres of a children's outdoor play area. And 78% agreed or strongly agreed that there should be a voluntary ban on e-cigarette smoking within 10 metres of the outdoor play area. We then asked, will people have the confidence to ask people who they saw smoking in these play areas to actually put their cigarettes out? 42% said that they were confident to do this, but 38 weren't. And there are further comments on this can be found in Appendix 3. Comments received about the inclusion of e-cigarettes in a voluntary ban reflected uncertainty about evidence of harm and benefits of vaping. Now, I can only speak for myself, and I think that I would like e-cigarettes to also be banned. We wouldn't be very happy if research in the future showed that there is a harmful, the benefits of smoking aren't as we thought they would be. And we could see that from cigarette smoking in years gone by. The interpretations of findings of this paper show a clear majority of residents who respond supported the principle of implementing a voluntary ban on smoking near children's play areas, and they also said it should include e-cigarettes in the scheme. Comments also highlight either a desire to make the ban mandatory, which I've said before we can't really because of the law, the bylaws, and how difficult it is to put into practice, and see the legal advice. That's on 1.3. It is hoped that a community-led scheme based on respect and goodwill is the favoured way forward. It is also hoped to include parish council in the scheme, and the proposed actions are on page 5 of 6, 13 of 57. From Healthy Lives, Healthy People, a tobacco control plan for England, publicised in 2011, the benefits of stopping smoking in playgrounds has been identified as follows. To support the denormalisation of smoking, children are very susceptible. If they see an adult smoking and they're a child, they're more likely to pick it up and take it on board in later life. To reduce the risk of exposure to second-hand smoke, to reduce smoking, related litter and the threat of cigarette butts. I personally have seen children pick up cigarette butts, and if there's no bins or anything there, it is a danger to them. And they're also non-biodegradable and toxic to children, wildlife and the environment. Also to reduce fire risk and to offer potential for increased use of parks and recreational areas, and I hope the committee will support this paper. Thank you.
Thank you. Committee, as you can see from paper B on page 9 of 57, it's recommended that we note the findings of the public consultation and endorse the proposed actions to implement a voluntary code of no smoking in or within 10 metres of children's play areas, to include both tobacco and e-cigarettes, subject to budget approval. Now, I suspect that there will be a fairly wide measure of common agreement on this, so in the interest of efficiently proceeding, I will allow you to ask questions, and also if the answer to your question implies a comment that you'd like recorded, please say, and can we agree this at that point? If we get to anything contentious, we'll do it as a proper discussion after the questions, but I don't want to prolong this more than we have. So if your questions lead to something, we're not actually asked to comment, but it's never stopped us in the past. So as I say, questions primarily, but if you want to follow up your question with I think we should do this, please feel free to do so. Councillor Simon Band.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question was just about what work's already been done about signage around the play areas.
I would just say that I put money in the budget this year for it.
There are various signs around most of our players anyway, telling you about the play area and the equipment there. Obviously, the proposed sign, if this is to be agreed, we either need to modify that in some way or provide new signs on gateways, and we'll probably have a retrofit type sign on the gateways that lead into these play areas. But as of yet, no work's been done to design that sign. It's planned to run a competition, and say subject to budget being confirmed.
Having hand waved at me from someone who's not a member of the committee, I'm not sure that's appropriate. You should pass a note to someone in front of you and ask them to ask the question. Possibly. Okay. Councillor Golding.
Thank you, Chair. The report talks about two different issues quite a lot, one of which is obviously this 10-metre issue, but the other is about litter and dropping cigarettes. So I was wondering if there was any kind of plans to move some bins so they were 10 metres away from the play area, so that people didn't have to choose between breaking the agreement or illegal littering.
We hadn't taken a view on that in officer view, but it's something we can certainly look at.
you're happy, we'll note that as something we'd like to be thought about, that the bins for the butts need to be more or less at the 10-metre point, not inside the play area. So that seems fine. Councillor Harvey?
Thanks, Chair. Just to pick up the point about notes being handed forward from members who took part in the debate previously and was involved in this coming forward, welcome the point about e-cigarettes. That was raised by members before, so really do welcome that in terms of it being included, and can we capture that as a comment, as support?
And yes, that's part of the support, including the e-cigarettes. Councillor Loney?
Thank you. Do we know how many of the schools in the borough actually have a no smoking ban around the gates? I'm not talking about the older schools, but there's an awful lot of parents who stand outside the school gates with the younger children for picking them up, and I wondered whether we knew how many of those schools have a no smoking ban around the school gates, because it does happen in other boroughs, I know. Thank you.
I don't know the answer to your question. Anecdotally, I was not aware of any, I've got to say that, but there may be some, but I don't know the answer.
Councillor Potter, did you want to briefly add something, as you are here?
Well, if I may, Chair, and thank you so much. All it is, Professor Anderson is a resident in Popley, and it was he who raised the issue with me first of all. I just wanted to make the comment because I'd been in touch with him. He and his husband were pleased, genuinely pleased with all the work that's gone into this by the portfolio holder and the staff. And whilst obviously hoping originally, I think, for something a little bit more prescriptive, I think they recognise that this is a really good start. It will, we hope, lead to improved practice, obviously, by those who smoke, and obviously we'll wait results on this. But he just wanted to say thank you, really, for the work that's gone into this, and he welcomes the initiative that's been taken.
Thank you. And please convey back to him, we were grateful to him for raising it. So I did have a question that I think I raised with Richard on Monday. Clearly, it can't be enforceable, it has to be a voluntary code, but I did ask whether our patrolling officers would be given guidance that if they saw people breaching it, they should have a word with them. I don't know whether we've been able to get an answer to that.
Clearly, they would be asked to approach the people courteously and obviously ask people to adhere by the voluntary code, but clearly they couldn't do any enforcement to prevent them from smoking if the people chose to do that.
And if the committee agree that would be a good approach, can we also minute that we would like that to happen? Anything else anybody wants to say? Yes, Councillor Harvey.
Well, just quickly on that one, if we've got our staff out there, I mean, one of the issues we've had in our ward is glass and other associated problems with play areas. And if our cleaning staff and the grounds maintenance staff are out there conducting work as well, an information chain back to yourselves here would be very useful, that they're picking up on that, so we're identifying, as it were, if there are hot spots where this is a particular problem in particular places that can be addressed in other ways.
Okay, thank you. I think that's slightly off topic, but I'm sure the officer noted it. So. Are we okay with that, committee? Councillor Michael Band?
Thank you, Chair. Just one question. I mean, if we're talking about a children's competition, what sort of timescale are we talking about in terms of the competition and then getting the signs made? And
clearly, there's no budgetary provision at present. I believe if the budget is been put forward for next financial year, so from April onwards, Hampshire, through their education team, are the ones which will be leading on the competition, but I don't have a time frame to give you at this moment in time. I would assume it is in the current school year, with a view perhaps to us implementing signs during perhaps the summer months, perhaps early autumn, I don't know. I'm just sort of picking up a time frame there, but I don't actually have a time frame. But certainly, yes, as quickly as possible, I would hope.
I think that is as quickly as possible as soon as the money's been approved. So that's, again, I think we'd like that captured. We wanted to see progress as quickly as possible once we've done our formal budget decision making. Are we done? Okay, thank you very much, Kathy. Thank you, Richard, part one. Right. There is, as you've noticed, no written report, although you should have had an opportunity to pick up a printed copy of the slides and one or two other items on your way in. so far we've managed to deal with this neighbourhood management topic without troubling a portfolio holder to come, but we're very grateful for Councillor Eachus for joining us tonight. She's just here to listen, I think. Richard is doing the talking. So, Richard, please report.
Thank you, Chair. The purpose of being here this evening is really just to give feedback about the discussions of the scoping group that's been looking at this neighbourhood management issue. At the last meeting of the group, which was February of this year, there were 5 actions which the group agreed wanted some work done on, and they're the 5 actions which are listed there, and my proposal is just to talk you through what we've done in relation to each of those. The scoping group wished to see a guide produced for members and for parish councils, and hopefully you've got a copy of that. It's this document there. We've tried obviously to keep that as simple as possible. We could have added a lot more information to it, but probably best to keep it simple for now and evolve it if the information is perhaps requested. So that piece of work we've done. On the back side of that, we've also given some guidance about how you can use the digital mapping system, the GIS information, which I'll come to shortly. So again, at the moment it's draft. The proposal is to finalise that over the next few weeks and look for that to circulate that probably early part of November to all councillors and obviously to parish councils as well. The second item you asked to look at was actually called Fix My Street. I think Councillor Mrs Court, I think, raised this at one of the previous meetings and said that this is something we ought to invest in. Fix My Street is a free internet-based and app-based system whereby you can report items, issues within the public place, and Fix My Street, the company, refer those issues onto the relevant council, borough council, county council, depending on what the issue is. We've chosen not to follow a Fix My Street option as yet. Some councils, Oxford being one, have chosen to have it embedded within their own website, and they pay a considerable fee for that. We have chosen to adopt our own system, a report it system. It's not quite Fix My Street. You can currently report issues online, and the presentation here, clicking on, this is Basingstoke and Dean's website, you can, through the home page, report issues, whether it's fly tipping, abandoned vehicles, litter, so on and so forth. That is how you as councillors can report, that's how the public can report. The work we are currently doing is to develop that a little bit further, so that when that report is made, it automatically enters all of the details into our case management system, and it then fires the issue off to the relevant officer within the council for them to action, and also to try and reproduce the complaints in a graphical way so it can be seen on a map, in effect, like a pin that's been dropped on a map. That work's ongoing at the moment. I believe that's due to be launched in November, possibly earlier, but certainly November. And a second phase of that is to be able to provide feedback to the customers, again on a fully automated basis. So when the complaint has arrived at the officer's terminal, he actions it and then provides a response digitally back to the person that raised it in the first instance. And hopefully that sort of completes the loop of the complaint coming in and the complaint being closed. That work, I say, is ongoing. What I didn't mention is also, of course, you can report issues via Hampshire's webpage as well. On Hampshire's roads and transport webpage, they too have a report it page, and again you can see here you can report potholes, faulty street lights. There's a whole long list. What I will do, Chair, is make sure these links are available to all councillors, not just members on this committee, but all councillors, so they know where to report things going forward. We've also done this piece of work, which actually was happening prior to the whole issue of neighbourhood management being brought to the committee's attention, whereby we were trying to ensure that our records of things that we maintained were digitised and available for both staff and councillors, and hopefully at some point in time the public to view via the web page. It's been quite a huge piece of work. We've spent about 1,500 person hours over a 5-6 month period, basically taking paper records, you can see that in the images there, taking paper records and replotting those in their entirety onto a digital mapping system. It has been a huge, huge piece of work. The good thing for us is it gives us far better information about the regimes of maintenance we apply to areas, but also the quantity of the areas we maintain. If somebody were to now say to me how much grass did we cut, I could tell you, and tell you fairly accurately, compared to perhaps not so many months ago. It was not so easy to do so. What that allows you to do within a digital mapping system is to turn various layers on and off, and you can see different colours mean different things. I have got a very small demonstration which I just want to perhaps try and show you. It can be accessed today, so on your council PCs at home you can view this information. This is the Sinbad homepage, and you enter the viewer here via what's called New GIS. This will bring you up a map of the borough, and there are ways of searching on this. You can search on a road name. I will search on a road name where I'm familiar with. 55 Wolford Way, which is Winklebury. I can search on this. It zooms down to the information, goes to a much lower sort of level. Now, if you know the area at all, this is just opposite Winklebury playing fields. Just to the south here is Winklebury playing fields. Now, I know we have a very large green space here which we maintain, so when I turn on my green space layer, I would expect this area here to colour, which it does do. There you are. And what I'm now able to do is I can click on this colour, and it brings me up what we call an attributes table, and I can see the size of the space, when the space was plotted, but more importantly what the regime is, normal cut, and who it's maintained for. In this case it's maintained for Basingstoke-on-Deane as public open space. Also within this viewer you can turn on some other quite important information. You can look at the housing stock when it was transferred in '95. So you can see from the various colours here, and there is a legend to support this, you can see from the various colours that things are privately owned or sold, or Sentinel's ownership or Sovereign's ownership, depending on the housing association. You can also turn on layers such as the public highway, the adopted highway. So very quickly now you can begin to see, you're painted a picture here of what and who is responsible for which areas around our borough. It's quite a significant piece of work to get here, as you can appreciate. It's not, I accept, it's not 100% accurate, but I'd like to say it's a lot more accurate than the multiple paper copies we've had scattered around the council. I could talk you through that for a lot longer. I'm not planning to, but my last bullet point there is that I will make an offer to groups, to political assistants, that I come and perhaps give you a short sort of 15-minute session at group meetings if you'd like me to. That's perhaps something I'd ask you to take away and have a discussion in your groups. I do think it'd be helpful. If I can train you, it might save me having to deal with inquiries. You perhaps might be able to self-service on some of those inquiries. The next issue you asked, the scoping group looked at, was this whole thing about notification of planned works. We do get notified of planned works from the Hampshire County Council. We do notify them of our planned works. We do try to ensure that when they are cutting the grass on the ringway, that we're able to perhaps undertake some litter picking at the same time. That's what we try to achieve. It doesn't always work, and sometimes it doesn't always work because their own contractors at the last minute perhaps change a schedule and they come in a day earlier or they come in a day later, and it means that we miss our opportunity to do litter picking. And sometimes it results in that awful situation whereby the mower runs up the grass area and shreds the litter into 1,000 pieces rather than 100 pieces, and we're left with a massive task clearing that up. Certainly the relationships with Hampshire have got better in recent times, and certainly the communication by them about their plan work has got a lot better. It can always improve, clearly. What we're trying to do is make sure that when they have got these works planned, particularly on ringways, where it does require a significant amount of traffic management, we can make use of sharing that traffic management. We don't come along and litter pick, they don't grass cut, and somebody else come along the following week and mend the streetlights. We try and tie it all up together, and that's something we're working with them to try and ensure that happens going forward. There are just a couple of issues which are sort of relevant at the moment. Clearly the work at Blackdown Roundabout is having an impact, not just on the roundabout itself, but also on the ability to undertake other works elsewhere on the network. Hampshire clearly don't want to have you congested at Blackdown and then congested half a mile up the road further up on the ringway. So we are restricted about what we can do on the ringway to some extent at the moment. That will get better, of course, as Blackdown finishes. But secondly, there's also been some changes to legislation around working on highway and the wearing of PPE and how you operate and undertake work in a safe way, and that has actually also impact on our ability to undertake work. So I would ask you just to bear with us while we're finding our feet on that. So particularly on higher speed roads, that is relevant. Around some of the cul-de-sacs, some of our residential streets, less of an issue, but certainly on the higher speed roads, that is an issue for us at the moment. And so we are trying to ensure that we get notifications from Hampshire. I suppose the issue there, and perhaps something we haven't given a great deal of thought to, is how do we get those notifications out to members so they are aware of Hampshire carrying out some work in an area, and we perhaps need to give that a bit more thought. Perhaps that's something the scoping group might want to consider, possibly looking at a bit more. The final two issues are actually quite related. This was about what could the council do on derelict garage sites. Could we use 106 funding? And also the next slide, which I'll come to, talks about can we take control of these spaces? And I'm just trying to talk to both slides at the same time. First of all, the use of Section 106 funding. Clearly, when officers seek to secure contributions, we have to show the link between the new development and how or where that contribution, that new infrastructure, might be required. And as a result of that, the 106 agreement will often say something along the lines of to provide a play area within the vicinity of the site. It's sort of that sort of wording, which does make it very hard to switch that contribution to use it to tidy up a garage court that's derelict or untidy somewhere else within the ward. So Section 106 contributions, I don't believe, are the right tool necessarily to fund some of this sort of maintenance type work that perhaps members are seeking. Garage courts, we have many across the borough. Most, particularly those in the town, clearly are owned by Sovereign and Sentinel and are in a reasonable condition. There are some bad examples, but generally speaking, most in the town are well managed and well maintained. There are a small number of multiple private ownerships. Thinking of the councillors in the room here, I know in Tadley Borkhurst area we've got a number. Councillor Bound regularly reminds me of that. And I know in the Brook Vale area we've got a number around the sort of Penrith Road area there. Again, Councillor Westbrook regularly reminds me of those. These are in private ownership and much harder for us to deal with as a council. What we do have from the housing associations, they do invest into our parking residential areas programme, they do invest in our environmental renewal programme, so I think they are contributing to try and make some of our communities tidier, in a better condition. But we don't have that similar initiative as a council in terms of what do we do in the case where we have a private owner. How do we tackle him? Do we tackle him? We do have powers as a council to step in and put right an area. What we struggle with as a council is powers to step in and take control of an area. And what I've tried to just show here on the last slide is just show some of the issues we face in our neighbourhoods and some of the legislative powers we have where we can step in, we can remedy a problem if the owner fails to do it. If he fails to do it, we can step in. But if he fails to do it, we step in. If he fails to do it, we step in. You do get this sort of circle of it's very hard to break. I know certainly comments in the scoping group was that can we as a council simply not seize the land and effectively take possession of it? Well, the simple answer is powers are very limited unless we start talking about CPOs, and that's when it becomes very, very complex and complicated. So that's really just a feedback of what the scoping group have been discussing of late. And Chair, really open up for any questions or comments, really.
Yep. Thank you. As there's no paper, there is no written recommendation. But those of you who were here last time will remember that we did formally appoint members to the scoping group going forward. Just to remind you, from this committee, that's Councillor Jones, Councillor Simon Band and myself, and then people who were on it last year, Councillor Michael Band and Councillor Michael Westbrook, and welcome back to both of you, and Councillor Miller. So we do have an ongoing scoping group, and the recommendation from the Chair is that we now ask any questions you want to ask, make any comments on the work done so far, and then agree that the scoping group should reconvene, look in more detail than we will have time to do tonight at the work done so far, and make recommendations for the future work of this committee. I'm particularly conscious that at our first meeting we had both Sentinel and Sovereign present, and they contributed, and one of them came to the follow-up scoping group meeting, and I want to go back and have with the scoping group and have a look at what further work we should be doing with them. But for tonight, questions, comments on the presentation. Councillor Gardner.
Thank you, Chairman. Hampshire County Council plan works. I have seen on numerous occasions Hampshire County Council putting up signage to say that work will commence, how long it will take, and 2 months later the signage is still there. Can we ask Hampshire County Council to remove the signage because it does clutter up the street scene when it's no longer required?
Thank you for that, Councillor. I will take that with Hampshire County Council.
Councillor Michael Band.
Chair. Richard, on the reporting site that the public are going to be able to access, will members of the public be given an update, and or will they be able to track progress being made on the problem that they've notified?
I will ask Katie to answer, if I may.
Yes, that is planned on the digital transformation project next year. Our current system doesn't allow you to provide updates, it fires and forgets. The system we're looking to replace that with will provide customers with the acknowledgement we've got it, we're dealing with it, it's done. It will also allow other people to see what issues we're aware of and ask to be kept informed themselves about actually duplicating the tickets that we get in for jobs. So that is something we would plan to do over the summer months next year. That's like the third phase of the work we've done.
For anyone listening to the webcast, you heard the question but not the answer. The answer is it doesn't do it at the moment, but it will next year. I think that was in summary. Councillor Harvey.
Thanks, Chair. A couple of points, really. In terms of the case management system, I can understand why you're doing what you're doing, actually, in hearing Kate. I appreciate the future and what you're going to bring forward. And the interesting thing from experience has been ringing the call centre's key, because getting it logged is everything in terms of getting a result. And it's interesting when you do that and have the follow-up, and it's following the follow-up. There are numerous cases that I've got where you log it, officer responds, and then you're into 3 or 4 responses. And it's how a system deals with getting an officer to come back to the member, back to the resident, when it's a complicated case. It isn't just as simple as picking a piece of litter up, and I'd be interested, the scoping group, looking at that, because it's a bit more complex, but some of the issues that are raised are a bit more complex around fly tipping and around particular, for example, the garages issue you raise. I've got a couple of other points I'd like to make as well.
So was there a question there? No, it's not. Yeah, it's okay. So as long as officers.
In terms of the electronic side of things, we were told a long while ago, again it came through committee, it kind of hasn't happened. Members of staff, for example, the grounds team or whoever will be out with a piece of kit, and I might come across something and be able to electronically write a ticket or electronically log it, rather than writing it on a bit of paper, coming back to the Wade Road or coming back to wherever to then process it. Is that something you envisage as being part of the system?
Certainly the intention is that now we've got our spaces mapped and they're available on a PC, they can be available on a tablet. So the guys will have access to these things on the ground. Not every single one, to be fair, but you know, the managers, the officers, they will have them. But they will also have the capability of taking a picture and, as you say, recording that there was a pothole there, a broken bin there, whatever it happens to be, and that feeding back in to the case management system. So in answer to your question, yes, that's the intention. It's just not at this moment.
It's amazing the power of a photograph, how that changes your response on occasions, to be honest. In terms of the map, I think the map's brilliant. I think the piece of work you've done is superb. It's interesting because if it's back to 95, then the other issue that comes up regularly is land that falls through the LSVT transfer. There are problem pieces of land that aren't picked up by any historic reference, and I've got several that I could point to. And finding out who responsibility they are is an absolute headache. And you search your way around the officers going, well, do you know? Do you remember the history? Is there an up-to-date land registry element to this, or is it just simply historic in terms of how far you've taken it so far?
Having now got to where we are with the old transfer information, the intention is to go that step further and go back to Sovereign and Sentinel, at least initially, and say, this is what we've now done. Do you have any up-to-date information you can supply us with? And hopefully this might kick-start them into getting it, or giving it to us, as the case may be, so we can actually get accurate association information rather than relying on stuff which is best part of 20-odd years old. So that's our plan. Again, we want to get our tool up and working and running so people could use it. What I would say, if councillors have got a site which falls between the lines somewhere, I'm often a good point of knowledge, so do contact.
I know we've spoken a few about in Norden. I'll come back to you on that, Richard. The garage bit is another big point. Most headache actually comes from private owners. Most headaches comes from not being able to take action against people who otherwise the housing association or ourselves or Hampshire would have an authority over. I appreciate what you're saying, but when it comes to fly tip, when it comes to road issue, I think one of the issues is our willingness to use the powers that we've got. It's sometimes difficult to persuade colleagues and officers to send the letter that says we have these powers. Sometimes we're a bit too touchy-feely, and I was wondering if there are ways and means that we can at least use the powers we've got in a much stronger way, particularly on ongoing and particularly problematic fly tipping in garage areas, which is, being parochial for a moment, causing no end of problems in my patch at the minute.
Yes, we can always be stronger in or more robust in how we apply that legislation, and perhaps that's the stance we need to begin to take. I'm not involved with a lot of that legislation and its colleagues elsewhere in the council. I don't know how robustly they apply it. One would hope they are applying it robustly, and if not, yes, I think we ought to endeavour, when something's reported, if we're not getting action by the private resident, then we should be using the powers we have to do that, and I would certainly endorse it, and hence I've just put that slide up there again, just so you can capture perhaps the teams that you need to speak to if you have a particular issue, and I would urge you all to do that.
I'm not in any way casting aspersions on environmental health at all. They're a good team, but the powers are. And my final point, Richard, relates to utilities. Because Hampshire's one element, obviously with them digging up the roads and doing work, but utilities are a major problem. And if there is any way of encouraging them to work with us as well, particularly in the context of digging up pathways rather than roads, it would be encouraged.
That's a good point. I was going to say that the particular point about Hampshire, which came out of our earlier discussions that you weren't part of, was that, as Richard indicated, if they mow the verges while it's covered in litter, the litter problem gets multiplied and multiplied. So that was, and we seem to have made some progress on that. And we will at some point ask Steve Featherstone, who raised it, whether he's satisfied we've made some progress. But at least, you know, that's good news so far. Yeah, yeah. Okay, Councillor Simon Band.
Thank you, Chair. My issues and questions were really around the planned work element. I've lost count of how many pre-contract meetings I've been for planned works for Hampshire County Council around Rooksdown recently, and I suppose I'm saddened by how many times, as the ward member, I am picking up very basic standard issues like where the contractors are going to park, and that is not dealt with by anybody. And then when the road is closed, as an example, this last week, the contractors are blocking a road, and it causes a snarl up and literally gridlock around the hospital. And it's a very standard, very basic issue, which I would be expecting officers of the borough and of the county to pick up. And I would absolutely then pick up the element of the slide that talks about, well, when things change, because of course that's a prime example of when things change, then people like Stagecoach will want to make a decision about cancelling a bus route. and they clearly are somebody, but everybody forgets to ask the ward member, but the ward member is the person that deals with the school children that are trying to get to school on the bus route that's now been cancelled. And one phone call on the mobile phone, and I could have very quickly answered whether school children are using that bus route.
Richard, I'm sure you can note it down. Can you say anything at the moment on that?
Well, the point I was actually going to pick up was clearly Councillor Gardner raised an issue about Hampshire County Council, Councillor Bound has, Councillor Harvey has. There's clearly a theme here, isn't there? It's something which, of course, we as a council don't have control over. They are the highway authority. They operate within their rules, the way they have operated or continue to operate. So I think perhaps, certainly we invited Sovereign and Sentinel to a meeting. We invited Hampshire originally. They were unable to send somebody. I wonder whether that's, Chair, something we might want to look at again, perhaps as a
That's exactly what I was going to say. I think we will take away an action point to try and arrange a meeting when Hampshire can attend and go through some of these issues with them in a friendly, constructive, trying to get agreement sort of way. Councillor Golding.
Thank you. My question is probably a bit easier. I'm really liking the look of this guide. As a new councillor, it does look very helpful. I'm just aware that when I started, I was given an induction pack and asked for some feedback. So my question is, please, could you make sure this is included?
Anyone else? Right, I have a question, Richard. It is a very helpful guide. It says on the back, how can I view the GIS data having logged onto your B&D computer open Sinbad, but I think you also said you're going to share it with the parish councils. So how is that going to work?
We haven't spoken to the parish council about how they will access it, but yes, that's the intention. They may not, some do have access to Sinbad, but not all. So it might be limited to those that currently have access, but it might encourage those that don't have access, perhaps to ask for access.
Thank you. I didn't know they had access to Sinbad, so thank you. That's very helpful. Anything else? So are we content to agree that we will reconvene the scoping group sometime between now and Christmas at least and decide what further work to do? Okay, thank you very much. Which brings us to the next item, another change of portfolio holder. Thank you, Hayley, for being with us, and Richard. We are going to have another presentation, and you are, members of the committee, are being handed paper copies of it. And when everybody's organised, we'll do our usual approach. I will invite Councillor Tate, the portfolio holder, to do his presentation, and then I will invite the visiting members to say what they want to say. And should I by any chance forget, just wave, you know. But I should remember. And the officer side, we now have Leslie Murphy with us. So. Councillor Tate, when you're ready. Could I have a copy of the presentation, please?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, members. Before we start, the idea is to give you a presentation and look at the way forward, and obviously to listen to comments and questions and see where we can go with that. So if we can go to the first slide, which is really just giving some background on the current situation with the LIF, and as I'm sure everybody knows, it was established 2 years ago as a mechanism to support and develop local infrastructure. And it is funded from central government's New Homes bonus, which is allocated to local authority based on the number of homes that have been created in that authority's area. And within that, there is no mandate from central government as to how this is used. And in fact, authorities in various areas vary, with some using it for revenue support, and others for capital investment, with no local content. And in this particular case, it's been chosen in the past to include an element of local content for local investment on local infrastructures. So the current state of Basingstoke and Dean's LIF. Currently, the lift budget to date has a value of £5.8 million. And to date, £1.2 million has been processed to projects. And currently, £4.4 million of the budget is unallocated to projects. It's, if you like, reserved. And we have a current spending or current budget round, which means that currently some £870,000 has been put forward as requested projects in this current round. The next slide is to give you an introduction or indication that within Basingstoke-and-Deane, for grant funding, there are numerous streams of which LIF is one. And LIF is specified for capital projects of over 25,000 with lasting significance. And though in some cases, by exception, there have been some revenue-based grants as well, but fundamentally they are for capital projects over 25,000. We also have a second stream, which is the leisure facilities and community buildings budget. And that's for what are deemed to be smaller scale capital projects up to £25,000. Now that total budget has a value of 70k in the current budget. Third element of this is Community Heritage and Environment Fund. Capital projects up to a maximum of 50% of the overall chef budget for any 1 year with a 40k budget. Again, so quite small budgets. And what we end up with currently is these three streams being used within grant funding, and there are issues about the clarity of what constitutes a project for any particular budget, and also issues in terms of the budget's resource and the needs within the particular, within Basingstoke-and-Deane to use these budgets to support local infrastructure. So it is quite a confusing picture, and it's confusing for the officers, it's confusing for councillors, and frankly it is also confusing for those who are coming forward with projects in terms of how best we can access the budget to make things happen within Basingstoke-and-Deane for those that live here. And the next set of issues in here, which are really quite important to recognise, is that these grants are operating within a financial landscape which is deteriorating in terms of resource base, particularly within the inbound to Basingstoke-and-Deane. Within particular New Homes Bonus, there is no clarity as to whether New Homes Bonus will continue beyond 2016. And that's a key element in the future planning of the finances and the grants going to the community. And one thing's for sure, that within the declining resource, there is not a declining application for resource, particularly in local infrastructure, which is in some cases aging and being used heavily. There is going to be a continued need to look after our current base, and also in the future, where there is development to build new resource within the communities. So the issue is very clear, is how to better utilize what resources, albeit diminishing, and how best to provide support for the infrastructure in Basingstoke-and-Deane. The three or four issues here for managing this are, first of all, multiple fund sources. And currently, in addition to LIF, we have S106 budgets and potentially still in the future as well, which can work within the borough. Another issue for the management of these budgets is the imbalance. There is an imbalance in that the two smaller budgets, which are fundamentally oversubscribed in terms of usage for the smaller end of the scale and spectrum, and also in terms of the nature of those facilities which need to be included. So, for example, how in the future we look after facilities which may, in areas which may not have development, or how do we look after the infrastructure in existing areas. So there is some lack of clarity in this, and this has come out. And the last element of this is there are also wider issues to solve within the grant funding of not only those which are defined within areas of development or wards within development, but also those which have cross-ward or cross-borough requirements. These are more complex. So this has partly come up from the original council motion, but it's how to deal with these in the future that the proposal seeks to deal with. So the favoured option for LIF in the future is to create a single fund to support local level infrastructure development. So one fund bringing together the current two smaller and the current LIF fund. And using part of the current LIF budget to sustain local development funds topped up in future if possible. Now, future if possible is dependent fundamentally on whether New Homes Bonus continues. If it doesn't, there is a different issue that's got to be dealt with. So at the end of the day, we're trying to put in a position where we can at least go forward with some clarity, and if at the end of the day new funds become available, that can build that future fund as well. And the third element of this is to create what I've called a standardized to transparent request, so that we have a much clearer proposal request coming into to the officers, that it can be clearly judged, can be clearly evaluated, and clearly then can be scored and then built as a decision to go forward. In contrast to the current system, which for those that are using it will see elements of negotiation taking place as to how best to go ahead. And the key to this for the future for me is that what's called a weighted application assessment. So very clearly what happens with weighting. Weighting is to define the issue that is most important within an application from a ward. And clearly the application is the weighting is based on whether the ward has undertaken housing development. So that the scoring says very clearly if you have two proposals of equal value, that the element which has scoring associated with did this ward have development, yes, that then scores it in double. So whatever happens, that the wards that are taking development are having first score at any investment in the future. So it's trying to keep the element of that we have in the current LIF, which is allocating resource to those wards which clearly have undertaken development and have the needs following that development to develop their infrastructure. So there are, I think, some benefits with this. Firstly, it allows us to take a more strategic view of the expenditure, and in doing so, that it gives us a better use of this, what is a diminishing resource. One of the questions with having done this, I think, is you end up with a more streamlined approach. And some of the questions which come out of the map are actually, this is a confusing, time-consuming process, so how can we make it much clearer? Also, by taking a much wider view, it does allow us to put in place the wider solutions, so that when you start looking across the borough, that in fact we are then able to perhaps make a strategic decision how to invest in infrastructure, which is not strategic infrastructure, but it's local infrastructure that goes outside of one particular area. And in doing so, I hope that we produce a structure which is more responsive to the individual ward needs. So that's how the LIF would look in the future. The question is how to get there as well. So to do that, the proposal is, we're looking at in this option, is to freeze the current LIF budget, both in process and structure, as at the end of the current round of budget proposals. So fundamentally, where we are today is where we stay for the current budget. In doing so also, that we would then look to transfer after the current budget round some 20% of the remaining budget to the new LIF fund. And this freeze would remain intact, these balances would remain intact as they've been earned for the next 3 years. At the end of that 3-year period, that the budgets which are unused, unallocated or unforeseen would then become part of this new LIF fund. So that will allow us to make a progression from where we are today and then get to a position where, assuming there is a future with New Homes Bonus, we can start building the new fund. At the same time as there isn't, we still have some capital left within that budget to get us through a reasonable period of time. So the new LIF fund, within the structure of this new fund, the basic principles are to ensure that the weighting, the measurement structure for any proposal is very clear, and that weighting reflects the development within an area. And secondly, to ensure that there is a transparent process that all participants can understand and deal with. And also then create a wider range of grants and potential awards. And the last element is also to take a more proactive approach, so that the council officers are working on a proactive way with those wards that have current budget within the freeze, and also in the future that there is a much more, if you like, not aggressive, but proactive to go out and seek to ensure that these are being dealt with in reasonable periods of time, and that there is support in terms of the planning. Because I think, again, some comments were raised that the development of a comprehensive plan to use budget can be a difficult task. And that may be something which has caused delays in the past. Well, you know, clearly, if it's delaying, then it's not making any benefit to anybody, whether that's the ward, to the members or whatever. So fundamentally, that we'll be looking more to make a proactive approach to go and develop structures and strategies with the officers. So finally, that's a diagrammatic of what this would look like. You have your two existing funds becoming part of the new LIF. You have part of the existing LIF being frozen through to award applications for the next 3 years, and part of the budget moving to the new LIF to develop the support for this new single option LIF in the future. So that's a presentation of the summary of the report, and with the idea of how to get to this position in the future.
Thank you very much. I think we'll let the visiting speakers have their say, and then we'll do questions. I'm not using the timer, but I am keeping a vague eye on the clock at the back. Councillor Potter.
Thank you, Chairman. I'll try not to abuse the hinted time limits you're talking about. Thank you for letting me talk to you this evening and addressing the committee. And just to say, first of all, I welcome Councillor Tate as the portfolio holder with responsibilities for LIF funding. I'm sure we'll get a much more transparent and open regime than we had previously. Mind you, he hasn't got a very high hurdle to cross for that. But in regard to the proposals that are before the committee this evening, I speak here tonight as a member of the advisory panel that the portfolio holder established, and I made a small contribution to that. But I'm also a councillor for Popley, which amongst other wards has experienced substantial housing development over the last decade and beyond, and has been impacted by that in a number of ways. The impact of new development is interesting, I think, in terms of all of the wards. I'm sure Councillor Band here tonight will speak about the impact on Rookstone, which, although is a new area in itself, I mean, in the fullness of time, I think is going to experience a lot of the issues that established wards have had, which I'm referring to. I support a lot of the analysis that's been made by officers within this report, but I personally don't support the recommendation to create a single fund. And I say this for a number of reasons. I think we can do a lot more work on this, and I hope that Councillor Tate won't be offended by this. I think it should come back to him for a slightly different approach to be adopted. My view, and it's a view that's generated by my experience of Popley, for example, is that here's an area, as I say, that's had thousands of new homes which have been built within its parameters over the previous years, and adjacent to it, which again has its impact upon Popley. But also included in it are areas of deprivation. We have areas within Popley that fall within the bottom quartile of the deprivation index. And we need to do something radical and substantial about those areas. And it could be done, it seems to me, within the sort of areas that we're now talking about, the more strategic approach. I know it's an overused word, but it's within the document here about the benefits of the single fund. But with a slightly more strategic approach, using evidence-based work that actually is going to give us a more comprehensive view about where regeneration should be taking place, we can make really good use of the money that currently is available to us. And I think that's the approach that we've got to adopt. I don't think we should do it on a single fund basis, because I think we need, albeit strategic, we need a much more flexible approach on that. And I know there was concern, it was expressed within the map, and I think Councillor Simon Bowen will endorse what I say on this, but there were philosophical issues about how new homes development throughout the town could impact upon town and borough-wide organisations, and we mused about that. For example, I know the Camero Centre was mentioned, where by definition, if you've got a massive increase in population through the town, it's almost inevitable that we're going to be talking about increases in homelessness, and therefore is it appropriate for an element of lift funding to be hived off, obviously to be allocated to organisations like that. And I think there's an argument about that, and that I think can be done within the existing rules. But what I think we need to do is, quite rightly, concentrate in a strategic way on those areas that have, by definition, generated the new homes bonus money in the first place, are taking new homes still within their own curtilage. And on that basis, if we go about this in the way that we did used to do, under the regeneration that I remember of not too long ago, and do this on proper information that we have got available, which is evidence-based, we can do some substantial things that we haven't been able to do up to now. One of the problems has been, I think, with LIF, it's been, perhaps we're looking through the wrong end of the telescope, Noddy, where we say, how do we find a scheme that actually satisfies the criteria of the existing LIF scheme? And we seek to find these projects, whereas if we did it in the more strategic way, we then say, yes, we've got a global scheme, we then look for the various fundings streams that we can make available for this, including LIF, and we can do a much more comprehensive approach on that. Can I just say one other thing, Chair, just so that, because I may not get a chance to come back with your indulgence, I know perhaps I will, but in regard to one of the appendices that's before us tonight is a report on the LIF projects so far which have been approved and declined. And you won't be surprised, I want to make reference to the notorious Bramley footbridge project, which is actually included within the Appendix 1 as a footnote. It's reasonably clearly worded, but I'm still not absolutely sure whether this project has seen the end of its road or not. It talks in terms of Network Rail confirming that partner funding is not available for the footbridge, and that ought to be the end of the matter. I've always argued that this was a Network Rail project in its own right. And I know at Reading West, Network Rail have said very clearly, if we can't provide a footbridge there that isn't suitable for those with disabilities, we're not going to do these types of things anymore. Now that ought to be the death knell for this one in Bramley, but I hope there isn't any ambiguity on this, and if that is the case, I'm sure the portfolio holder can confirm it. Last comment, Chair, and I think on that basis, this committee and the portfolio holder ought to say in this context, if we are faced with applications in the future that don't satisfy the Equalities Act 2010 in regard to access for those with disabilities, we will not countenance such applications. And that ought to have been the case here in the first place. Why Councillor Jay Warden have pursued it so hard, I can only imagine now was for his own benefit, but I'm bemused by that. It wasn't as though it was a key seat he was competing in. But anyway, that's water under the bridge now, so I hope we can get a very clear statement on that.
Thank you. That was approximately 7 minutes, just so you know how generous I've been already this evening. I think if you could just I think it's a very short answer about the footbridge.
There is no footbridge in Bramley, and there is none. There will be no future.
Thank you, Councillor. But could I just ask you a brief question? I mean, we've got very clearly your message. You're against the merger of the three funds, and we will discuss that later. And you were talking about other uses of funds. Were you primarily focusing on capital expenditure, which is one of the other issues we made earlier, or were you advocating use of these funds for revenue and capital items?
What it gives us the opportunity, I think, very briefly, I mean, if we approach this on the basis that, and I'll use Popley as the example, there's an area which has areas within it with maximum deprivation, where if we have the great minds of this council working on it, there are a number of solutions there which I could talk through tonight, I won't, which we can seek to offer, it seems to me, as a comprehensive solution for that area, primarily capital funded, but we would have other funding streams as well that we can actually tie into, some of which might be revenue, but I mean it would depend on the type of things we were coming forward with.
Councillor Westbrook.
Thank you, Chair. I'm sure that to committee members and others it will be no surprise that as a ward councillor associated with an area of new development with one of the largest pots in the LIFT fund, we're here tonight to discuss the changes that you are considering, and I'm here to represent our residents' interests. I'm also speaking on behalf of my fellow ward councillor, Jack Cousins, who is unable to attend. Can I firstly point to statements on the Council's website and the current aim of the policy, whereby it states that the Council has decided to allocate the majority of the new homes bonus received to improving infrastructure, of which half will be spent through the LIFT. We are keen for the communities that have provided more homes to get the funding they need to ensure that their local infrastructure isn't overstretched. The funds mean they can work with their borough councillor to decide what would make the most difference in their area. Brookvale and King's Furlong at present has a substantial amount in that fund, and be in no doubt that residents are well aware what is available to their community and will not be happy to have it taken away. The recommended option in this report would mean they would need to bid for their own funds, and as a sweetener, some weight for having been affected by new development may be attributed to their case, or as the report states, be recognised and received a positively weighted assessment. This simply won't wash, and to further rub salt into the wounds, funds may even go to areas who have strongly fought to not have any sort of new development in their area. So we really do need to remember that this fund is aimed at supporting areas and communities that have been affected by recent housing growth. I acknowledge that there is a need for some change. Discussions on several projects based on community needs, including parking projects, road safety improvements, have been very difficult. Under the current rules, making the link to development has been challenging. There are areas of the ward in need of regeneration, and although very worthy, seem to struggle under the present rules to be linked to the new developments, partly as a result of the ward being dissected by three very busy main roads. The large amount of money in the pot for our ward tells you just how many properties have been built in our area. It's going to continue to take time before all the pressure points manifest themselves, and it will take time before you can establish how those changes will affect, for example, education, transport and parking, or more importantly, the overall effect on the fabric of our estates. Therefore, the funds need to be set aside for a longer period of time. In addition, the ward is also having to adapt to the effects of a changing community due to the rising cost of housing. Apartments on the new developments, traditionally providing first homes, are increasingly becoming family homes, all of which leads to further pressure on our infrastructure. Our local schools are now adapting to the needs arising from the new developments within the ward and are currently in the process of expanding. Again, these changes weren't immediate, and that is why I believe the pot of money allocated to our ward should remain in the ward until the full effect of change can be realised. Every day we're beginning to see the effects of these changes to our community. Over the past few months we've been contacted by residents who as parents were upset that they and their children walking to school were at risk from other parents driving cars on the pavements. Out of this engagement we were actually sent detailed drawings of how a project could be devised to solve it, a community reacting to change. Part of identifying need is the community itself. Brookvale's own community centre, which has benefited from some Section 106 money as a result of the new developments, found that whilst the building works were being carried out, that the community engagement declined, and this takes time and effort to rebuild. So in summary, I urge the portfolio holder not to accept option 3, as option 3 is not an option for my residents. I ask him to take this opportunity to change the way we approach this fund going forward by working with councillors, officers, partners and the community to regenerate areas identified as being in need through a proper evidence-based approach, but also continue to protect allocated money as well as thought-out regeneration projects need to be given time to develop. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, now this is going to be a more challenging debate, so I do want to do it in the questions first and real questions seeking information. There will be plenty of time for discussion, expression of views after that, but let's get the questions first. Just a reminder that the recommendation is that the views of committee are sought on the preferred option 3. That doesn't mean we can't talk about other things, but obviously we're getting a very clear steer as to what is the portfolio holder's preferred option. And I'm grateful to the portfolio. He has fleshed out what is in the report with the slides tonight, and I think we take it that the slides have the same status as if they'd been in the report originally. So we're talking about the report as modified by the slides. But as I say, if we could start with questions, and I saw Councillor Simon Bound first.
Thank you, Chair. I wanted to seek some clarity about the word waiting. I see in some of the discussion within the documents that I've seen as part of the map regarding LIF, this issue of whether a new development, whether they've got issues, whether it's a want or whether it's a need. I have a concern with what sounds like a good idea as far as a weighting turns into exactly what you're trying to avoid. If you have a weighting for areas that have had new developments, I have a suspicion what will happen, and it will happen in my ward if nowhere else. We will work very hard with the Office of the Borough Council to come up with a list of things that need money. And we will use that money with a list of wants, not needs. And I would expect every other ward who has money at the moment to do exactly the same, and we will end up with more wants than needs.
And the question?
I thought that's what we were trying, and I just wondered how we were going to deal with that as far as the word waiting, because there's a danger that as soon as the funds are released, all the funds are used by areas of new development with applications for wants. And I see that as an inherent issue with the waiting question. I just wondered whether we'd given any thought to it.
We'll ask the portfolio, or the officer if you, yeah.
I mean, at the moment, the guidance and the application form has criteria within it. And obviously, all of that criteria we seek to address, and at the moment, we choose to report that in a Word report rather than doing a scoring. That was a decision taken because scoring, when we first came in, was going to be rather difficult for a new scheme that nobody really had got, and that people were struggling to actually evidence that. So there was a choice made. I think what's been suggested here, and in the map itself, there was a desire that we followed that recent community and voluntary sector approach, the grant system that's gone out, which is clear stated criteria and a scoring mechanism with that. It would be the same sort of thing. It's not, we're not sitting here already worked it up. This is a consultation exercise, and the whole point of that is to understand what we need to work through to make sure that we know what's within scope. What is it we're targeting? What do we want to actually evidence? How are we going to evidence that? And then part of that scoring mechanism will be stating what your evidence will need to be, and there'll be a measure against that. Within your scoring mechanism, within that criteria, would be an additional element, which is, have you had development? So the rest of the criteria still needs to show that you've got a need, and what's backing it, and what's your benefit going to be? What's your long-term sustainability? What's that impact going to be? So
Can I? Yeah. Okay. I've got various. Can I just be quite clear, because you took. Both of you took a long time to get around to the use of the word need. That your very final bit of your answer said you would have to evidence need. So was that a clear answer that you were evidencing wants will not be enough? You have to evidence need under this new proposal.
can I say that actually evidence need is an existing requirement, but it's in, and we've tried to demonstrate that within the report. It's extremely difficult for people to do. It's also required that you demonstrate, and I think Councillor Westbrook just, certainly one of the councillors mentioned it, the link to development. And for many of the applicants coming through, they actually can't really demonstrate that what they want to do has anything to do with the development that's actually generated the fund that's come through. So need is quite important. It's already in that language. That's what we're looking for. It's something that says, you've gone out to community, we know there's an impact on your area, and you are looking for some significant piece of infrastructure that actually needs some support, not small-scale stuff that, with a bit of fundraising, you could go and sort out yourselves.
Simon, do you want to come back either to clarify that or with the second question?
I suppose all I wanted to everyone to say that I'm not sure that answers my question, Chair, to be honest.
We'll pick that up in discussion.
I think you can evidence need very easily when the monies seem to be going.
Okay, we'll pick that up. I've got several people now, and the next one on the list was Councillor Gardner.
Thank you, Chairman. It has been raised, but the footbridge at Bramley, I was very disappointed to hear the portfolio holder say that it wasn't going to happen. Now, I can understand the issues behind it, but having represented Bramley for 16 years as Cleaver councillor, I'm well aware that there's a crying need for a bridge. There are a lot of safety issues around the Bramley crossing, and I would like to know from the portfolio holder, possibly after the meeting, exactly how we're going to get around those issues if we don't have a footbridge.
I think a very quick answer would be helpful.
I'm quite happy to talk about it separately. You know, that's no problem.
Councillor Harvey, you were the next.
Thank you, Chair. I guess my question leads on from what's already been said around the weighting and the need element. And I guess what I'm trying to question is whether or not this fund should be seen as a fund which is grant allocated and you farm out accordingly, or whether the purposes for which we should be looking at this, because we're only talking about the 40% element. There's the other 40% which is strategic, and there's the other 20% which is revenue support as well. And they each have, within your presentation, they each have the role in that context. And I welcome the presentation and thank you, and welcome you also to the Cabinet role. And I hope we can have a constructive conversation about this, because I think the concerns about how we use the money and how the money could achieve outcomes for residents who are seeing the development impact their communities beyond just simply a direct link is something I would like to see explored, and the group would like to see explored, I think, with you, considering Popley, Brookvale, sort of areas, and there's others as well like Rooksdown, who are experiencing the development, but also see, and I take the point about need. So I would like to understand, is there a willingness from the Cabinet to consider the fund in a different way, from it being simply a grant fund to which you apply and then have this process? Because I think there is a willingness to do that. There is a conversation to be had around regeneration in those particular communities like Popley and Brookvale, which are identified in the indices of deprivation, where evidence will give you need in an appropriate context, in a real context, and where that money could make a huge difference to the fabric of that community and deal with perhaps a them and us situation, which we would obviously not wish to see from new development. There's a number of elements to that that I'd love to unpack in a lot more detail than just a simple question to begin with. But nonetheless, would the Cabinet be willing to entertain that idea and have a conversation along those lines, rather than it just being a grant fund which everybody can apply for, but think about it in a much more different way, but also bear in mind there is the other two pots. This isn't the only element of the local infrastructure funding we're talking about.
I think that was a tricky question. We'll give them a minute or two to think before they answer it.
I mean, to be fair, Chair, it's difficult.
I think it was a good question, but
yeah, it is,
and
I'm trying to have a conversation while turning it into a question, so I apologise, because it's almost the fundamental point to the paper, actually.
I can't answer for the Cabinet, obviously.
I'll come back with it.
But just on some of the points that are coming through, and I'm not quite sure whether, I'm just trying to tease some of that out and be a bit more explicit. I think one of the conversations that we've had with the map, and something that we'd like to talk about, and which is alluded to in Councillor Tate's presentation, is that we do have a lot of information that's available to us. As officers and wards, there is information there that perhaps we should be using a lot more with ward members to actually look at within those areas, what are you trying to achieve and how do we focus the resources on that greater return. I think potentially that's part of what you're talking about. Is that right, Councillor Harvey? So I think there's a desire to do that, whether it's in a grant format or whether it's more Section 106 type approach. Is that, I mean, it's that sort of, it's been allocated. Yeah.
If I may explain myself and explain where we're thinking and feel strongly on this, we think that the link between where the new homes are built and where the new homes bonus money is spent needs to remain. Quite clearly in the sense that new homes built in a ward generate new homes bonus for that same ward, but that money, because it's only the 40% element that we're talking about, and we recognise that, could be used and should be used for regeneration schemes as the old neighbourhood renewal strategy used to. Identify need, look at the indices of deprivation, see where those monies can make a significant difference in neighbourhood renewal, both social and physical, both the revenue and capital element, but in a properly worked up programme of intervention, of action, that would achieve outcomes, real genuine outcomes to the issues we see in those wards. Further, that the new homes bonus should be led by that evidence base, really, that it's not just a vox pops of who shouts the loudest or who gets their application in first and then you see the fund depleted, but it's a much more thought through, coordinated, real approach led by the council to achieve the results in those communities that would then link the development to the existing community and their benefit. And I can think of that across the town, actually, where that would be very, very relevant. The 40% of new homes bonus that is strategic, the infrastructure reserve, the strategic infrastructure reserve, the other 40%, could be used to support those borough-wide organisations. It's there for that larger strategic focus, not on a ward-by-ward basis, but on the basis of, for example, the Camrose, which is a borough-wide organisation in terms of its achievement and its outcome.
You are into the debate now.
Yeah, and finally, just so I am clear, that could also help those areas that don't have new development, but also have regeneration needs. And our point really is there is no regeneration monies coming forward at all. It's not coming from government and it certainly isn't coming from the council because of the situation we find ourselves in. But it could lever in both Sentinel and Sovereign with their work programmes, both of whom are very tentative because of the housing bill changes, but they want to do regeneration in those other areas. It's a big subject area that we would like to engage with you on as the Cabinet member, and we have, obviously you can see, we have very particular views on this in terms of where we would like to see it spent.
Councillor Tate, did you want to come back with your half of the answer to the questions just to go? There are points there that I definitely want to pick up in debate, but let's do the question.
You asked a very straightforward question about the ward's relationship with the budget. And I do believe that a ward or an area that has accepted or taken development should be in a position to deal with that development by having the highest priority to be able to use whatever budget is available to improve the local infrastructure. I absolutely agree with that. The issue about the Cabinet view or my view of a grant or a strategic fund, I think that where you're talking here about the local infrastructure fund, it's fair to say that there hasn't been a lot of dialogue to say, oh, should it be something else? And where we are currently is looking at it as a grant for an area which has taken. So it's very similar in concept to the existing LIF. Whether in the future the budget is more designed as strategic regeneration. I understand your point regarding regeneration. I'm not quite sure that in my own mind I see this type of grant dealing with regeneration on a strategic level. It's a local infrastructure grant. Now that begs a question which is I'm afraid I can't answer immediately, which is about strategic regeneration, if, where, how and what funds are allocated to make that happen. It is, I think, a reasonable question. I can't pretend to be able to answer that for you tonight. But I think it is something that you know, you've brought forward, and certainly from my point of view, I need to discuss how that is going to happen or not, as the case may be. So I think in context, the issue of the LIF in the future, as it is in this option, is very much still a local infrastructure grant rather than a strategic redevelopment. And where the boundaries between the two are, I think it's easy to say on extremes, but it's actually very difficult when you get to the middle of what actually this means. So I think what we're dealing with here is almost one extreme, which is the local infrastructure. And where that moves forward into strategic, I have to say I need to take some discussion and advice on that. So I can't answer all of it. I can only give you the two direct answers I've got there.
But as I have to say, I think that was an issue that didn't directly come out of the paper, and I will want to explore it in the discussion so we can pass on our comments. I've got two questioners. Councillor Still, you're on.
Thank you, Chairman. This is a question for Councillor Tate. I believe this is a case of trying to mend something that isn't actually broken. The present process works well, and it's a relatively new process. Would you agree with me that this is a new process?
Can I ask you what you define as a new process here? Because are you saying the new LIF is a new process, or the existing LIF is a new process, or what?
Well, we're here tonight to discuss options on the existing lift, and I'm saying to you that the lift as it is now is only, what, 2 years old, and to me that's a relatively new process, and I personally don't think you have given it enough time to work, basically.
Well, I would beg to differ, obviously, because I've got the paper. Is 2 years too long or too short? I frankly don't know. I think 2 years is more than adequate to bring out what are the weaknesses in any structure, frankly. And I would disagree that there is evidence that it's not fulfilling its real purpose. So I would disagree. I think that there has been a period of time, and at any point, you know, whether it's 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, whatever, I think it's incumbent to reevaluate what is happening and look at how to improve it, and that's clearly what we're trying to do here. So I have to disagree. I think it is a reasonable time to see that there are weaknesses and then how to put those right for the future.
Do you want supplementary? Or I mean, there's plenty of chance in debate.
Yeah, sorry. It's the nature of the beast. It's development. It's something that takes years and years to do. The monies go to the communities which have all the development, and I don't think you can actually say after 2 years, oh right, well it's developed, but now we want to take the money away, because what's going to happen down the line, what's going to happen down the road with that new development? Things come along. So anyway, that's how I feel.
Thank you. We will pick that up in debate as well. Councillor Golding.
Thank you. I think where I'm struggling on this paper is the concept of weighting and the fact that that's really fuzzy at the moment, and I'm finding it quite hard to kind of come up with a very considered opinion on whether I think this is a great thing or an awful thing, because kind of the devil is in the detail. So I was just wondering what the proposals are for formulating this weighting. Like, is that something you see engaging members with, or see kind of just presenting, or, you know, is it going to be included in a map? What's your plans?
I've certainly got no problem as the drafting of this comes along, sitting, discussing and listening to make sure that we get it right. That's not a problem for me at all. I think it is fuzzy because it doesn't exist currently. What we're talking about here is the principle. Can we build something that is transparent and at the same time supports the element that is clearly needed to be, which is about locality and how you make sure that the priority goes to those that in the current system have and in the future will need. So no, I don't have any problem with as we draft this and discuss it, bringing that into a forum for criticism and debate if necessary.
Supplementary, or are you okay? Councillor Simon Bound again.
A couple of questions, Chair. My question initially is, would Councillor Tate agree that communities do take a long time to build? And some evidence that I'd like him to consider is when we look at Rooksdown as a start from scratch area for the borough, that since the first house was built in 1992, it took 12 years to establish the parish council, 15 years to establish the community association, 19 years for the community to get their community centre, 22 years to get their first shop, 23 years to get their first part of their school, and I suspect the last house won't be built for at least 30 years after the first one was built. And therefore I would ask him whether he thinks 3 years is an acceptable time to ring fence for an area.
Clearly a development takes a period of time, and a community is not going to be fully formed and is not going to have everything out in its public domain after 3 years. What we're talking about here is how to ensure that the current budget is frozen so that it can be used within a reasoned period of time. At the same time as we don't know what the future is going to be. Now, there may be a lift in the future. If New Homes Bonus continues, we don't know. So I understand that you cannot identify a completed figure, maybe ever, because communities are evolving. They don't finish. The development may finish, but the evolution of them carries on for whatever period of time afterwards. So I think I would accept that you can't sort of say arbitrarily, today is the finish. But there is, from a point of view also of the management of our resources, a point which you have to say, okay, how can we best use that? Now, the other side of the mirror image of it says, well, okay, if you accept that communities evolve and the development finishes, then at what point do you decide whether development is finished or not? And when the evolution is finished, equally it's impossible. So I think it is a difficult position to be in, but equally the paper seeks to say we are today where we are and we want to provide the stability for the future. Beyond future is somewhat questionable because we don't know enough about where that's going to be. So I understand what you're saying, but it's an arbitrary decision ultimately, yes. I mean, you can't say that something's either started or finished. It is a period of time, and it makes sense from the point of view of how you plan and use your budgets.
I think there was an answer. We will have a debate on it, but you get another question?
I was just saying, I believe you can discuss and agree where the finishing point is when you've got something like a local plan that does major allocations of housing, and there are probably only 2 left in Rooksdown, one for 700, one for, actually 3, one for 700, one for 100 and one for 122. I think it's probably very clear to draw a line when the development has finished and evolution starts, and I suspect it's very different from building in infrastructure that is not there from the start and then looking at maintaining, upgrading and regenerating infrastructure that was there at the beginning in different parts of the borough.
Did you have another question? No. End of the questions as far as I'm aware. Now, what I want to try and do is take the issues one at a time, starting with at least the ones that are easier to define, if not easier to answer. So in the hope that we can pick up, at least be clear what the differences of view are that we can both record and leave the portfolio holder to think about. So you will all get multiple chances to speak. Councillor Harvey, did you want to try and derail that before it starts?
No, I've got no desire to derail it. I would totally appreciate one a good conversation. As you move forward, I mean, we've got an amendment that we'd like to move, if it's appropriate to. Appreciate that it's comments from the committee. In terms of that, if the conversation is heading in the direction of travel anyway, we're good with that. But if not, we'll move the amendment, but give you notice of that just in case.
Thank you. So I think the first point I'd like to start with views on is it's taking bits of the proposal at a time. So the part of the proposal is that out of the existing funds that have already been earned from new homes bonus we've already received, that 20%, I think, should be moved across to a new fund. I'd like to come to the question of whether we should merge the funds a bit later, but the idea is to move 20%, it is 20%, isn't it, out of the existing pot into some new scheme. What are the views on moving 20% out? Councillor Simon Band.
I'm sure you would expect me to resist the 20%, which I do. I will accept there is a need to remove something. I do think it is difficult for areas like Rooksdown to look at their neighbours in Winklebury with no money and some of the needs that they have. I suspect absolutely some of those needs are revenue as well as capital. I think 20% is too high.
Yes, so too high. Councillor Harvey?
I guess this comes down to the approach angle. If we're talking about ward by ward drawing up a proposal to say, for example, in Norden, were it to be the case, there was £700,000 worth of funding, I would want to look towards a scheme that said, okay, what are the needs, what's the indices of deprivation telling us, what does the community require to tolerate the level of development that's taking place, but more than that, because it is about smoothing the edges. One of the biggest issues we've had with new housing development, particularly against existing communities, is the sharp edges, where it literally sees there's the new house and there is the old one relating to the old estate. And that's where regeneration across the whole becomes. And I guess that's the point I'd like to make. I don't think taking just 20% out covers the issue. What I'd like to see is a holistic ward-by-ward approach that addresses the issues. And in those wards that don't benefit directly from development could benefit from the other 40% the Cabinet and the Council has already set aside.
Making life easier for myself, if a ward currently had 500,000 and we took out 20%, they would only have 400,000 there. We'll come back to discussing how you would spend the 400,000 at the moment, which is a more challenging question, I think. I'm just asking for views on whether it is, in order to get something new going, people feel it's acceptable to take out the 20%.
In order to get something new going, I would be asking the fundamental question. That's what we're saying. So no, we wouldn't support that, I don't think at all.
Councillor Gardner.
Yes, I accept there are problems with the existing system, but I don't think a flat 20% deduction across the board is the way to go about it. It's a matter of finding those wards who are not using it or not using it effectively and taking their money into a new fund, which then becomes available borough-wide. But those wards where the money is being used effectively shouldn't have anything taken away.
Can I come back to that? And it's an interesting slant on it. I mean, I think what we were told was that I think out of something like 4-point-something million, so far only 1 million has been allocated. So in a very simplistic way, you might say nobody's using it effectively. And I'm sure that's not true, because we've got all these comments about the length of time it takes. But you really think it would be possible to work out who's not using it effectively?
Well, somebody who is using it effectively, of course, is Tadley.
Right. But if we could, okay, we'll stick on the moving the 20% first. I think I saw Councillor Simon Band before Councillor.
I think I'd agree with Councillor Harvey. In some respects, I think we do need to deal with what are we doing with the 20%. I think that absolutely, I've been in too many meetings, even as a very new councillor, where we've been discussing issues like Many Down, and I now find myself going to a meeting about trying to develop a west of Basingstoke investment plan. And I've asked the question, where's the plan for the whole borough, to have a strategic view of what the needs are, how it's going to be supported, how we would prioritise that, and whether that's a capital or a revenue issue. And I suspect if you were to then ask me to go and talk to my constituency and try to defend taking 20% away, I think that would be very difficult if I fundamentally believe it was being spent on a list of wants and not evidence needs in the places where it really was needed across the borough.
Councillor Harvey?
I do want to challenge this point about the effectiveness and those wards that ain't. The system's been set up currently where, in effect, it's almost impossible to look at the whole of a ward and the impact of development. You have to justify it directly to the development. Now, we all know that not every impact is direct. Impacts can be across a geography that relates to a ward and beyond a ward, particularly, for example, in some of the developments around Chinham, if you think of Razors Farm and the others that are coming. And in that context, an evidence-based approach that says, rather, who's getting in there first with their bids, but says, actually, look, this is where need is. In these areas, we have this pot of money, we can achieve this outcome with a properly worked-up scheme that the officers lead on with the communities. This is about involving everybody, not excluding anybody. This is about saying the parishes in certain areas, like Rooksdown, but in my area it would be the community associations, the schools, it would be the ward members working with the cabinet member to achieve a scheme in my ward, or Popley, or wherever, that delivered outcomes to meet those challenge needs that we know about. It isn't about effectiveness, and I think that would be a very wrong thing to say. You ain't being effective, you lose your money. Would be a wholly mistaken way to go.
Anyone else attracted to this idea that it should be, rather than just taking 20%, it should be based on effect? Now, I think that's probably not going to run. Any support for the 20%? That's a yes, is it, Councillor Still, or wish to speak?
Well, sorry. Well, I'm agreeing with everything Councillor Boundy and Councillor Harvey saying at the moment.
So I think, to be fair, there wasn't much support for the 20%, so we'll note that and move on. Whether the existing money earned to date is retained at 100% or reduced to 80%, the second part of the proposal is that where it hasn't been spent, or at least committed within 3 years, it should disappear. Is 3 years the right length of time? Councillor Simon Bound again.
I just want to repeat one point, which is absolutely looking at the development of Rooksdown, and I speak as somebody who only arrived in Rooksdown 6 years ago. I absolutely understand how much work it took by the community to reach the point that it achieved when I moved in. I know how much work it has taken to develop the applications, which are 3 in number in the last 2 years. How much work it has taken to think about what the plan should be for the next 5 years, and to get a community organisation, a parish council and the wider community to understand the gaps that will be left by the borough council, the gaps that will be left by the county council, and the gaps that will be left by the numerous numbers of developers that have not done what they should have done, and that will not be evident until the last house is built, and probably some months afterwards, after the borough council has or hasn't adopted open spaces in the fit state, and the county has or hasn't put things like road crossings in, and we understand the travel of children for the primary school, etc., etc. And the list goes on.
So is that a view that it should be 3 years after the last house is built, or in perpetuity? Or
I would love to suggest it's 3 years after the last house. I will have a word with the developers that they just do the foundations.
Okay, Councillor Harvey.
I think, again, it's difficult to be as simple as that, because what we're actually talking about is a much more deeper issue of the impact and the shape and form of development and what we want to see. From our point of view, there is an amazing opportunity here, because with a new cabinet member, with a new approach, which we're asking to look at, I think there is a sense of saying, look, across the 40 and 40, we understand the 20, and I don't think anybody, and it's a budget issue, I appreciate that, but no one's questioning the 20%, because that revenue support's required because of what's happened to our revenue support grant and all the rest of the budgetary issues. And I think nobody's questioning the need for that 20% to underpin our ongoing revenue issues as a council. Park that bit for the moment. But what could and should shape both the 40% for a strategic reserve and this other 40% on a local level is worth having a really good conversation about. because I think we can achieve some wins, big wins, for wards across the borough in a more coordinated, focused way that aren't time constrained, that aren't based on 20% here or 20% there, but actually look at what's required. That's what I'm asking to really do, Chair. It's the need bit that could involve crossings. It could involve working on the fabric of our estate. It could also be social to address health issues. There's 4 super output areas, as they call them, 4 geographies in our borough that fall in the 30% most deprived in the country. They ain't surprised which ones they're going to be, but there are other wards, which colleagues would be surprised at, that fall in the 50% most deprived. I'm sure you already know that yourself. So there's agendas here that we can cross-party work on, I think, quite constructively to achieve a lot more bang for our buck, as the saying goes, and we don't waste this money.
Yeah, no, that's fine. I know we'll come to that. I mean, so far we've only had one person who essentially thinks 3 years, well, definitely thinks 3 years is wrong, and it should be a very long time. Can I ask, particularly those on this side of the room, I mean, if in 10 years' time we still had 3 million sat there that hadn't been spent, that would be a reserve, which you're normally not very keen on. You're like keen to see the money spent. So would you be willing to see some sort of time limit saying if we whatever method, whatever we spend it on, however we spend it, if it's still there in X years' time, we should spend it on something else?
It's funny that the Conservatives are asking Labour to spend money. I find that amazing in that. Just to be seriously, I think if you are talking about a new approach, then why are you putting a time limit on it? If we haven't spent it in 5 or 10 years on the things we're talking about, then we all deserve to be kicked out of our seats as councillors, because to be honest with you, we all know our communities in a really good way. We should do, I'm sure we all do. Take that experience with us, with the cabinet member and the money available with officers, and if we haven't spent it in 5 or 10 years in the way we're describing, then we should be kicked out of office, to be perfectly honest with you. This is a whole new approach that we could be talking about.
Councillor Gardner?
Keeping on the theme, I think it should be looked at ward by ward, and there are going to be some areas where a longer period is appropriate. There are going to be some areas where money is not being spent, projects are not coming forward. Then it makes sense to move that money into a central fund.
Councillor Simon Bound.
Just to pull up another point that we talked about at the map, I think when we talk about effectiveness of spend and identifying needs, I think we do also need to recognise that there are many wards, because we're talking about a snapshot of time as in today, who perhaps their community association is in a downward cycle as far as strength of trustees and volunteers, as far as ability to do many things that we're currently asking them to do. We're asking them to build neighbourhood plans so that we understand what they need from and interact with things like Mini Down. I'm sure things like that would absolutely help with the evidence of needs within their wards, but there are those limits, because not all parish councils are strong at one time, not all community associations are strong at one time, and there is something that says a word of caution against how we somehow assess whether it's been spent effectively in one ward, whether it's limited to a different length of time, because I'm just concerned about who's making that decision and what evidence are they using to establish that, because I think there is something that says, at the moment, I'm not sure as a borough council we have a handle on, and I'm talking about the organisation and probably the offices, on what the needs are in a coordinated, planned way, so that we can deploy whatever resources we have, whether that be manpower, whether that be revenue, or whether that be capital.
Councillor Still.
You're kind of asking us to look into a crystal ball and say, pull this magical figure out of the air, and how many years? Well, my gut feeling's telling me 3 years is not enough. Absolutely not enough. We don't know at this, how it's going to go forward with new developments and what they're going to need at the end of it all. And that is why I said you're trying to mend something that's not broken. You've got to give people the time, the ward members, the communities, the time to realise once their communities are up and running what they actually need.
Okay, I think again this is a consensus that a rigid 3 years is not popular. I mean, I must personally express a certain sympathy for Councillor Gardner's way of expressing it, that, I mean, if for whatever reason there is a ward that has a pot of money that is doing nothing recognisable to do anything about it, and it's sat there for a while, it would be very foolish to leave it just sitting there doing nothing. But where there is, you know, some may need longer to evaluate exactly what their needs are. But Councillor Harvey, you can come.
Appreciate what you said. Just a note of caution on that last point. I would argue and suggest, for example, if a ward, and we have them, has an area, for example, that falls in the 10% most deprived for education attainment, and that's part of new development, new people coming in, shaping schools and all, the devolution agenda we're talking about in other places, then there is an argument that says, actually, just because the community association may not have been capable, or the councillors have been able to get the expertise together to put the bid in, doesn't change the need of that community. Therefore, the onus is upon us, as the authority, to achieve a result, an outcome in that community with that money, to affect that very clear need. And it might not express itself through a community association that wakes up and says, actually, we've just realised we're the 10% most deprived for education. But we know that from our own evidence base.
Okay, and I think that was something that the portfolio holder made a big point of, that we are going to be much more proactive, and I think perhaps that is I suspect we would all like to endorse that, that we, you know, it's not a case of saying, well, if, you know, we do nothing for 3 years and then we say, you've lost your money, but that, you know, we officers with the portfolio holder support proactively, to be honest, I think it's probably an academic question, because I suspect once we're proactive about it, that the money will be spent, but it's, Councillor Simon Band.
All I was going to talk through was actually just one of the examples that the Rooksdown Community Association has gone through to try and look into this crystal ball, where there is a huge amount of evidence that the one thing you can absolutely guarantee new developments bring with them is an enormous hike in the birth rate. What that will absolutely mean is we will have a huge number, absolutely massive number of teenagers in 15 years' time. I would be expecting officers to have that expertise to look at the demographics and be able to forecast and do some of that crystal ball work. Those are the sorts of things that we should be doing now for our existing wards, and also those wards that are yet to come, because we have that evidence, and I suspect we have that evidence, and there are ways of finding out that evidence more generally for the things that we are planning to do across the borough.
Okay. I think we'll move. Councillor Golding, I think.
Thank you. I'm going to come back to the waiting again, and its missingness, because it is so hard, because here we are discussing as if after 3 years that money is going to disappear, and actually that's not what you're saying in your proposal. You're saying it's going into a more centralised pot, but until we know how protected those communities are going to be in terms of their priority, how long that priority is going to last for, we can't kind of say whether 3 years is enough or not, in my opinion.
Thank you. I think that's a good point, actually. Yeah, good. So I know I'm still trying to do it bit by bit so that we don't just go round and round in circles, but it is a consistent theme. Actually, you can't answer this question, so you know what the answer to the next question is, and we will have to try and round that up. Trying to work out what is best. So I do want to come back to your discussion that grants are not the right, you know, producing the right answer. But for the moment, I would like to just continue exploring, if there was a grants scheme, how it would work, without asking you to agree that the grant scheme is the right way. So there are I think things that have been said about it. One is the waiting for the people who've earned the money, as it were, the communities that have had the development. We did ask a question about that, and I think we got an answer that. Did we get an answer as to how heavy that waiting would be? Would that rule?
At the moment, there is no prescriptive exactly what that will be, because in this discussion, it's if you were to pool it and you brought a single stream in, then what are the applications you would be expecting to see? Who are you targeting? So you would have criteria against that, and then you would be looking at how you divvy that up, if you like, and where you would apply the weighting. That's what
I mean, I get the sense that we would all like to see quite a high weighting towards the communities who have had the development, but does anyone want to put it more specifically than that? And I think the point, we've already been registered that either the MAP or the committee would like some further discussion once some more work has been done on drafting these weighting factors, and I think the portfolio holder said he was happy with that. So that we don't need to get a final answer today, but does anyone else want to say more than we think the weighting to the communities who've had the development is very important? Councillor Simon.
All I wanted to do in addition to that, Chair, was put a caution on it. I have spent many years dealing with criteria in human resources areas and spent many hours talking about weighting, and my experience is weighting always gives you something that you weren't expecting as a behaviour, and therefore that is why I'm so cautious about it, because I have no doubt it will create exactly what we are trying not to achieve.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Harvey.
I mean, just to be absolutely frank and to be blunt about it, I don't think the weighting and the idea that you would take money from a particular community because a bid came in and you suddenly see it go off somewhere else in the borough would justify that community taking that development and the impact on it. I think you're getting into deep water there because you're pitting communities against each other. And I think this idea of criteria in particular is difficult because not every example is going to fit, and how you make the criteria broad enough, open enough and flexible enough almost defeats the object of having criteria in the first place. I think the way we approach this really, that's the fundamental point.
I mean, I think it was the other Councillor Golding said earlier that the devil is in the detail. Whoever said it, it's exactly true. But I do think we should recognise, I think it's generally recognised that the new system for all the merged grants in relation to community things and the transparency. I know there were some teething problems, but by and large people have found that to be a significant improvement on what went before, which was a whole plethora of things and nobody quite understood how the rules were. So I think there's a prize worth working towards here.
I just wanted to use, again, some experience from another place, Chair. I once went to a very stimulating workshop on organisational design, and the one huge message that I took away from that workshop was if you're trying to keep something simple, you are probably doing the wrong thing. We need to split it up into two parts. It needs to be very simple for those that are applying, because that's potentially where we have some weakness as a borough. We need to use our expertise that we have in our officers to deal with those applicants and the needs and the priorities that we have. But again, I would caution against saying if we keep it simple throughout every aspect of it, one big fund, one application process, etc., etc., that somehow we have achieved a success. We won't have in any way.
I think we'll try and read it, although, to be fair to the other, and I wish I could remember exactly what the other process is called, that was attempted to be simple at the front end, but behind there was a lot of experts, and we involved outside experts in the evaluation of those bids, so that would pick up your point. Can I ask for views on something else that's come up, two or three people have mentioned? One of the existing criteria is that any expenditure should be directly related to the development, which does strike me as an extremely difficult thing to establish, which one or two of you have said. Does anyone want to say more on, should that go? Should it be less important? How would you like to see that modified? Or are there any supporters for the current process, other than Councillor Mrs. Still, who doesn't think, is happy that it isn't broke, which is good. But does anyone else want to? Does anyone want to say anything more for or against having directly related to the development as a criterion? Councillor Band, Simon Band.
It was really a question. I think it was said earlier that actually it was a question that there were more issues potentially that were indirect regarding a new development. I'm not sure there is a definition of what's direct and indirect, and I go back to the data and experience that we have as far as birth rate. if there was an issue of antisocial behaviour in 15 years' time because of the amount of new development we've had, and now having 3,000 extra teenagers in the borough moving around the borough at night, would we call that direct or indirect? Because I certainly wouldn't be able to answer that question.
Councillor Harvey?
I mean, a good example of where it doesn't work at the moment is, for example, a development that may well have a parking or transport impact that is reflected in another part of the ward. That other part of the ward doesn't necessarily directly link to that development, but it does through the impact that the development is having on it. And in the existing criteria, it is incredibly difficult to justify within the criteria the use of lift monies to address that infrastructure issue. And that's just one particular example. So the catchment element of this, I think, is difficult. Communities are communities, wards are wards. They are levels of operation for ourselves and for our funding purposes and for our understanding that I think are legitimate to work in, rather than as specific as it must absolutely directly link to that particular development, not even as if there may be multiple developments in a ward. If you see what I mean, it's far more complex than it necessarily needs to be for the purposes for which we want.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've picked up earlier that there is a very strong feeling that you still want the money linked to the ward where the development has taken place. But I got a rather a feeling that you didn't want it strongly linked to the actual development itself. You wanted it linked to the ward, but not directly to the development, which was what I was picking up that we ought to be feeding back as a comment. But I've now got Councillor Gardner and then Councillor Michael Back.
Right, 2 points. When we talk about directly related to the developments, we're not necessarily talking about infrastructure which is needed to support what has just happened. We are talking about something which will be for the benefit of the residents who have just moved in. And that can be adjacent to, it could be in a neighbouring parish, but it would not necessarily be directly into the development itself. So I think looking at it on a slightly wider view is very sensible. And I failed to catch your eye on the last point. We talked about waiting, but this probably also comes out from that point. I would hate to see a very good project failing in an area that hasn't got development because it hasn't got the weighting in favour of less beneficial infrastructure which has just gone to an area because it has the weighting.
Councillor Michael Band.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just briefly, I mean, I think that with any development, the effects of that development are bound to be spread much wider than just the development itself. So tying the money very closely to that development, to me, doesn't make any sense.
Councillor Simon Band.
I just wanted to remind people that we do have the 20-40-40 split, and I believe that's why the split is there. 40% is there for the strategic, broader impact across the borough, and we decided on 40%. I will accept that we may not have had any evidence as to why we chose the 40%. What I struggle to understand is that we are happy to go from 40% to nothing.
Okay, thank you. Can I ask a question? Because the portfolio holder, because just to be quite sure, you have talked about this new transparent system with the criteria and applying it from your preference to the 3 merged funds, and your preference was to leave the 80% where it is allocated under the current system. Were you proposing so you're not proposing any change into the mechanisms for dealing with the 80% that would remain? Okay, thank you. Can we now move on to the question of whether... Sorry? Yes. Yeah, sure.
To Simon's point, I suppose I'm really thinking about Tadley in particular, in that it's got 3 wards, but those wards are very, very close together, and it encompasses the town of Tadley, plus Balghurst and Wolverton, but they're all very, very close together. So that is what I was particularly talking in terms of, and not necessarily Basingstoke town, where I can understand Simon's points.
Okay. Yes, and the other band?
Just to accept there probably is a Tadley issue, Chair.
And Councillor Gard.
Just to remind you that when we were first looking at the allocation of this money, it was by parish, not by ward. So it may well be there's a development in one parish, but you may want the infrastructure to the benefit which will benefit that, but it's in a neighbouring parish.
Okay. I think it would be good to again get some clarity on that. Obviously, within the town, it's not based on parishes. So, what is the current system, please?
I'm going to have to try and work out what the question was. But as an example, obviously, Tadley Youth Facility has gone through with lots of pooled sums of funding. It's a really good example where they identified a need, it crossed into lots of parishes. It wouldn't have made any sense to try and resolve it in each of those parishes, so they've pooled the resource and it's happening primarily in Tadley. What we do at the moment, and it's very difficult to say that the criteria says this, this, this and this. I think what we're trying to report to you is that we've spent the last 2 years actually trying to navigate and negotiate and come up with something that works for everybody. And what we look at now is what does work. So Popley, some funding went through about a year ago, and that was very much within the ward itself, but there was an argument or an application raised, if you like, from Sheb and St John that they wanted something done to their area as well, and they were taking some Popley residents for their facilities. And that was a discussion with ward members, and there was an agreement that there was usage, and it was allocated outside of the Popley area, if you like. Does that answer the question, or have I missed it a little bit?
Well, I think that one specific question was whether the money is attributed to parishes rather than wards in the
It's probably wards. I mean, I'm trying to... It's listed... I'll give you an example. Currently listed as East Woody, Cliddesden, Preston Candover, Bramley, Newtown, Candover, Heriard. So you start to get the areas that have had
Yeah, so that's
development.
parishes.
Yeah.
Councillor Harvey.
Just on that point, there is an interesting example in the town, because not all of the areas of the town, and we've discussed this before, and Leslie won't be new to this, that, for example, Chapel or Viables, there are areas within the descriptions that don't fit wards, even now. And I think that, again, that's where the description should come, because the development does impact the ward, not necessarily the way that we've chosen at the moment to describe the area. So the geography question does become important if we drill down to that level, to be fair, Chair. The parishes, as you say, is a parish list, but the town list becomes something different, and that's worth having a conversation about.
Yeah, but I think we've had as much of a conversation as we can tonight on that, and if you wanted to have more conversation tonight on that, I think, you know, the clear message here is we still value the link to the community that's had the development, but we're not totally enamoured of saying you have to be able to prove a direct link between what you want to spend the money on, what the need is, and the actual development, as long as the need is closely related to the community that's had the development. I think that's what we're all basically... I'm not trying to put words in your mouths, but I think that's, with the exception of Councillor Simon Bound anyway, maybe what we're all saying.
All I was going to add, an application certainly came to me, and I think where in some respects, for some applications, it may be difficult to prove the need. In others, it's very easy, or very easy to prove that it isn't linked. And I'm just concerned that we are sitting here with a pot of money, and there may well be other organisations who are very keen to go, we're having funding cuts, Basingstoke and Dean have got a large fund of money, let's talk about the county council, why not, it's the elephant in the room, and they all turn around and say there are some things that perhaps we would have funded in the past that we can support organisations to apply for money which we will not have to spend. And I suppose in some of those examples, and I can think of absolutely one, it was easy to prove that the need was not coming from the development. That may prompt other funding questions about whether the borough wishes to support some other funding, but I think we just have to be very cautious about taking something out. And again, it's just across the board, because of course somebody may abuse that to turn around and say, great, we can demonstrate a need. Well, I'm from all sorts of different organisations, and I can see that demonstrate there's a need, and all of the money that we intended lets other funders off the hook.
Okay, thanks. That is a different angle on it. Yes, okay. Can we move on to the question of the merger of the three funds? Because at least two of the speakers earlier were against it. Views for or against? I mean, I can see the merit, that there are the difference between the other two funds is extremely confusing, and having one single pot so people know where they come to might be very straightforward. But again, it does presume that you would still have a grant-based system, and we will come back to discussing whether that's right. But within a grant-based system, would people see the merit in merging the three and making life simpler, at least for people applying? Councillor Gardner.
I can see the merit in having one fund on the grounds there's actually to be more money in it if you're going to apply for something, because there's less likelihood of the funds running out. But if we're going to have a single fund, are we going to have a single application process where at the moment we have three slightly different ones? Are we going to make it more complicated for small grant applications? Are we actually going to deter organisations from applying for things that they would have had before?
I think the answer to the first question... Do you want to answer it? I think I thought it was you.
I think the whole point of bringing it is to simplify it. I appreciate the comments made earlier, but it is that clarify what the purpose of the fund is for, what's in, what's out, what the application process is, so there aren't lots of different ways of doing that, and a transparent mechanism for how you would judge the merit of each application. Yep.
Specific, if you've got a community structure that you want some money for, is it come for the community heritage environment or the leisure facilities and community buildings? I mean, it could come from either. So it is, for those of us who don't have any of this development new homes bonus money to apply for, those issues are quite tricky when your parish is trying to get at one of these tiny little pots. It is very difficult sometimes to know which one it should be. But I think, Councillor Harvey, you waved.
I just agree with you, really. If you look at the list of those that have been approved, a lot of them are physical buildings relating to village halls and other facilities in that sort of context. And if you then say, well, where should it come from? Well, the leisure facilities and community buildings was always before LIF. And so it's the pot everybody went after, and it's reduced and reduced and reduced, understandably because of budget constraints. If you then look at the community heritage and environment, well, should the LIF be funding things like an application, for example, from the Holy Ghost to say, look, we need to do X, Y, and Z to this church building in order to maintain the heritage and the quality of it? Now, is that actually improving local infrastructure, or is that retaining a heritage asset which we care about? It's just thinking that through in the sense of, are there examples that we would want to retain as different from LIF and infrastructure where that heading would be relevant? And I can think of examples immediately in Oakley in terms of your own heritage assets that you would want to maintain through that budget. Just a thought.
So I think I detect that if we kept a grant-based system, there's no strong view against the merger, which, gosh, what a surprise. Councillor Simon Barry.
All I was going to say on top of that, I do wonder whether there's enough work being done to do an analysis for the community buildings, so that I know community buildings have a survey done, even just being a sort of a quick walk round every year to understand actually what are the needs for the buildings. Because again, I'm just more than a little concerned that it's left to the ability of the organisation that may well be running it, and of course they only need to be distracted for a couple of years with another project, and of course the cost goes up, and that doesn't seem like a very effective way of spending our money.
Do you want to make a comment on that? No? Okay.
I don't do it, but obviously the community wellbeing team do get involved in, and they do analysis of community facilities and needs. They've got the community building strategy, so there's a link to that. And I think recently they've just updated on the sports side. They've done the sport need as well, so that there is data out there, and I think that's part of what we're trying to say, that actually a proactive use of that to help inform where those needs are is what's looked for.
And I suppose I hear the word link, but I don't necessarily hear the definition of what that link is actually achieving as far as action. You know, as far as understanding, is the requirement, whatever the current figure is for that fund, that we know that it's going to be a figure X in 3 years' time and a figure Y in 7 years' time, and if we do a level of investment now, we'll have a quieter year in 10 years' time. You know, we haven't seen.
I mean, I think that's outside the main scope of what we're talking about. I think it's an interesting point as to whether we should be doing more proactive work to actually work out what the budget needs to be based on what the conditions of the buildings are. But I think perhaps that's a little outside the scope now. I'd like to come now to the point that Councillor Potter raised when he was speaking, and Councillor Harvey's said, I think, essentially the same thing, because I'm struggling to understand exactly what you're saying, which is why I wanted to have a proper discussion about it. As I understand it, you're both very keen that the monies should still be linked to the communities that have had the development, and you're both very keen to ensure that we do a proper audit of the needs within that community and that the money is directed at those needs. What I'm not clear of is why you don't think the existing mechanism is capable of achieving that, and is the problem that grants have to go to somebody outside the council has to apply for a grant and you think we should be spending the money directly, or is there some other problem that I haven't managed to determine what it is?
I'll tell you what, Chair, if I put round, if you don't mind, the amendment we would like to propose.
Yeah.
Ask people to...
For the benefit of the webcast, Councillor Harvey is now distributing a piece of paper with some proposals on it so that all the committee have it.
I mean, I guess what we're saying is that we think, and we're talking about the 80% here, and this is the discussion and the conversation we'd like to have, and the 240% that exist. What was the purpose of having the local infrastructure money in the first place was to deal with the impact of development and the benefit or the disbenefit that it created for communities as a result. So we think there should be a strong link that stays where new homes are built and where new homes money is spent should remain. And we're specifically talking about the 40% here that you're talking about in this paper. So that ward base, for about want of a better term, new homes money should be used for regeneration schemes as part of a neighbourhood renewal programme. We would love to go back to that analysis that we had before and was endorsed cross-party, because this isn't party political at all. It goes across different wards and different complexions. That picks up, for example, the indices of multiple deprivation, that picks up the issues of where Sentinel and Sovereign are identifying, that picks up, for example, what parishes have identified as a proper neighbourhood renewal strategy for that ward, and that could include both, for example, new communities like Ruxdown as much as existing communities like our own in Norden or Popley or Buckskin that we're talking about. But that spending focus then is evidence-based, and we direct it, because the issue I think at the moment is you get a series of grants applications that might come from very well-meaning organisations and groups that might come to achieve an outcome that reflects good things for the community, but it also might just be to replace a boiler or to put a park bench in or to do that sort of work. And what we're suggesting is there could be a much more tangible outcome for those communities faced with the real issues that we face, that are infrastructure related, that are regeneration related, that relate to the development issues that Councillor Bound has spoken to already, that we would want to see taken forward. And that relates to that evidence-led proactive approach that the Cabinet member quite rightly suggested. The other 40% that exists, that's rightly funded borough-wide projects, that's been incredibly useful in funding those elements, could be used to fund the borough-wide organisations that we're speaking about, that Councillor Bound has already referred to, where, for example, like the Camrose, its impact is something that might well be reflected across the borough rather than specifically in one ward. It might not be that organisation, it might be someone else entirely. For example, any of those broader organisations that might wish to apply for this fund. That should come from that bigger strategic reserve pot, that other 40%. But there are wards, aren't there, like South Ham, like Tadley, that aren't actually subject to development but do have genuine needs that would be reflected in that evidence base, like Winkleberry in that context. So we would want to see, we think it would be worth having a conversation around the 40%, this other 40% being used to support similarly clearly identified programmes. We don't want it spent just willy-nilly, not spent just out of hand, but a really thought-through agenda here that could deliver quite tangible outcomes. That's the sort of conversation we'd like to have.
Thank you. My final element in this was to get onto the discussion of the other 40%, so we'll part that for the moment. Can I just take you through, just to clarify some of what you're proposing, and then I think the portfolio holder, I'll invite him anyway if he wants to ask some questions about this as well. I mean, I think the first paragraph we have generally agreed on tonight, so I don't think there's any, I can't see anything contentious about that. Now, I can quite see why, for a ward like Popley, regeneration would be a priority. I can imagine that other places might have other priorities. And what I can't understand is whether the current system doesn't allow Popley to focus on the regeneration and allow other people to focus on what they think is important. Because I certainly think it should do that. That if that's your priority, that's, sorry, I don't mean Councillor Potter's priority, I suppose, and if you've got money in Northern, you should be able to focus on that. Similarly, the index of multiple deprivation analysis will be very relevant for those wards where it's high. It was probably not very relevant for a lot of the rural, well, it will be to some extent, but it may be less relevant elsewhere. So what I'm teasing at is whether actually what you really ought to be asking for is the ability for this to work in the wards where it's relevant, not for you to be pressing for this to be the thing that is applied everywhere, where it might be less relevant. So perhaps you could just comment on that point before we go any further.
I think that's a fair point, and I think that's part of the conversation to be had. And I think, for example, Ruxdown, that may not have an immediate regeneration need, but does have a community plan need element, does focus, I'd appreciate that. A good example that comes to mind, I think, and it was the way we went about Bishop's Green, and I know the Cabinet member will appreciate this. I think that evidence-based approach that resulted in the need that appeared in Bishop's Green, but was masked by the rest of the ward. And it's those sorts of areas where ward members' ability to influence this and to shape this with their community groups and organisations becomes really important. And it's not the only rural example I could pick. And it might well be that the IMD is not relevant as a database of evidence for other wards. But what I'm saying is for those wards that we represent, where we have got significant money that comes from this particular fund, we think the direction of travel that would most benefit us in that respect comes from this way forward. And you're right, the other 40% becomes very relevant in that conversation.
40%. Now, why is the present scheme not able to deliver what you want in the wards where it's relevant?
Because what we aren't doing is taking the holistic view of the ward's needs. What we're doing is saying application by application by application, not an appreciation with ward members of the deeper issues and the deeper regeneration. But that's what the neighbourhood renewal strategy was always about. And it was about not a grant-based system where you apply. If you were to say, here's £750,000 in Brookvale, here is the evidence, here is the community support, here is a direction of travel in the plan to go forward, that's one way of doing it. If you say, here's £750,000, apply for the grant fund, however long it takes, applications, left, right and centre, there's no overall holistic coordination of that. And there is no specific, and this is the important point, specific reference to achieving outcomes against the issues we face. One of the things I'd like, and this is no criticism of anybody, I think there is, and it's across both administrations from both historic and now, we've been very good in some cases of doing really good physical regen, but what we've missed on occasion has been the social element that goes with that. So we've done a tremendous amount of good rebuilding places, but what we haven't put with it is the social programmes that go with changing the environments of those communities to fulfil the bigger idea of regeneration we had at the time. And I think this is where this infrastructure, which is not just physical but social, can make a huge difference.
I will now pose that as a question to the portfolio holder, because I mean the portfolio did tell us earlier that he is not through this paper seeking to change the procedures for the 80% or whatever that remains in the existing thing, but that is a request for doing things a different way with the existing money for the wards where it's relevant to do things a different way. And it does seem to me to fit quite well with your proactive approach. I mean, your proactive approach could be to sit down and work out what, in discussion with the ward members, what the needs are in those wards, and then, you know, do people, you then have to find someone to apply for it, or could you even allocate the money without an application? So I think, I just want your views on whether there really is something that could be done with the money remaining in the big pot to deliver what they're asking.
If we just talk about the lift pot now and the potential to do that, and I'm going to talk about Popley to a certain degree, because that's sort of what happened. I mean, the Popley ward members came to officers with what they thought needed to happen in that area and tried to push that through. I mean, you brought that knowledge, and officers have sat and looked at what's the evidence base, actually what are the other things that are happening, so are you cited to this is coming down the line, so would we want to do that? So there has been some work done. And a key part of, and I appreciate there's a shift, if you like, in the culture of what you're suggesting, but I think within the spirit of what already exists is a ward members get to say what they think they want to support and what should be happening in their wards. So they do have absolute ability to come and say, can we talk to you because we think these things need to happen, and actually how do we take that forward and how do we have that conversation? And I would suggest to a certain degree, I'm looking at Councillor Potter, there was some conversation around those and some of the applications that have come through. We've encouraged the community facilities to do them because it's that community ownership, but it's very much with ward members being actively involved in saying what should be happening in that area.
And perhaps I'll ask, portfolio as well. I mean, that seemed to be with a tweaking or a different emphasis in the existing system, you could actually deliver for the work. I mean, I think Councillor Harvey accepted the point. You would not want to impose the multiple deprivation analysis on every ward. There may be other, or regeneration, there may be other wards where those are the things that the ward members and the local community want to prioritise. But where that's what the community want to prioritise, you seem to be saying that it just needs a bit of tweaking of the existing system and we can deliver that.
I think that if with the current lift funding and the current situation, is that if by custom and practice that we're not getting there, that's one thing. And if the reality is we can get there, because actually we're not quite getting the right place at the right time with the current budget, then clearly I'm more than happy that we find a way to get to the situation where the community is specifying in a wider vein what it needs to do, rather than, you know, there's a grant. If you have a strategy for using that budget, it is far more it's going to be far more successful in its usage than just saying we're going to do one thing at a time. So if it's not in there now, and there is some discussion, maybe it is or it isn't, then reality is we should get there with this current funding, absolutely, and do that. And you know, that's, I think, is whether it's a problem or not, that's how we should look at these sums of money. Yeah.
Okay, Councillor.
No, thank you. I welcome the Cabinet members' comments. I think I appreciate Leslie, the officer's point of view on that, and I think we would have a different view because of it's a different mindset in the way you would use the money and the way you would take it forward, rather than just being simply project specific in that context. What we're talking about, and it is interesting and forgive me, I can't speak for Popley, I will speak for Northern, where regeneration has taken place and new houses have been built, where I'm talking about both the fabric of what's next door to it, where I would want to use this money to deal with the community issues, and I would want to use it to improve the environment in which people lived, both in the new housing and the existing housing, to create holistic communities, to do the community work that would be required with a real neighbourhood renewal plan that we know in the past has been successful, and we can achieve that. Now, I'm not saying that's the blueprint for everywhere, but in Popley, in Northern, and in Brookvale, and in Buckskin, we know that's a direction of travel that would succeed. And it would also help us, and I'm thinking of South Ham here, if we were able to talk about the other 40% of what it could achieve in some of those communities like the South Ham extension that have been desires of doing things for years, but we've never been able to achieve it. With this kind of approach, you might be able to do something quite profound for those communities.
We'll come to the other 40% because I think that's a more challenging question. And I'm going to give Councillor Potter a brief opportunity to comment on what's just been said, if you'd like to.
Well, I would, Chair, and I'm genuinely very briefly. I mean, in terms of the example that's been quoted, I think probably somewhere in what I said originally, I think it's the whole approach. I mean, what happens, I think, up to date with LIFT funding is that we look around for projects that would fit the criteria. We find mechanisms, organisations that can actually be the host applicants for that. And in Popley, I think the one that Leslie's talking about obviously is the community association, you know, related to the Popley Fields community building there, and we develop a scheme around that. If, however, what I think is being proposed by the members of the committee this evening was to take root and find favour, it would be that much more general approach to regeneration proper within an area like Popley, and there will be many others that fit that bill, and there will be some like Buckskin that haven't had new development to the same extent but nevertheless need regeneration resources to be provided, that with officer support, and this is going back some time to the way we used to do it, could be developed in a much more, whatever word I use is wrong probably, but sophisticated way really, that rather than one-off projects, that Paul Harvey's used it tonight, the holistic approach really about what that area needs, and we haven't approached it in that way up to now.
Okay, thank you. So I think we have captured a thought that there is a lot to be, for the bigger fund that's left, to looking at the ways in which we can take a more proactive, evidence-based approach to the needs of the community that are related in some way, that has had the development and are related in some way or other to that development. I mean, that needs a bit of thought. I don't think you could write that down on the, you know, just like that. But I think that's been accepted in principle that we can do. But it has to be based on what's appropriate to that community. So not you know, I think you're accepting that it won't necessarily be neighbourhood renewal for Rooksdown, and it won't necessarily be multiple deprivation analysis that's relevant in everywhere. It's what's relevant to for the community that has the fund that can be spent. So I think that's fine. So does anyone else want to say anything else on that issue before we... Yes, Councillor Gove.
Just summing up what you said. This is right for the town centre. It's right for some areas where we have got multiple deprivation. Yes, we can target some of that 40% for the major infrastructure projects. It's wrong for the 40% which is specific to other areas. So I think it's, as it stands, it's far too universal, it's far too prescriptive, and I couldn't support it.
Thank you. But I think we've already conceded that that point. Now, coming to the last bit, the 40%. Now, that's not in the paper, and the Strategic Infrastructure Reserve is a very different animal from the other. But I must admit, when I saw some of the argument, and the question was about some of these, you know, whether we should take some of the money from the lift bit of the funding and say, no, that doesn't go to particular communities, that goes to borough-wide things. I thought, no, surely the strategic infrastructure half is the money. So my initial thought was yours, but I suspect that money is already earmarked for other things, and we might be asking a different budget question than whether that's how that should be used. And I certainly don't think we can get an answer to that tonight, but we can at least make sure we've posed the question. But is that, could you comment on it? How committed is the Strategic Infrastructure Reserve? Is there any scope for freeing some of that money up for things like Camrose, which are of benefit to the whole borough? Though not directly related, I think I picked up the point earlier that there is some link with development, because the more development we have, the more need there's going to be for some of these central resources. And if not, can we at least have some debate about where we might look for funding for that sort of thing? Or
okay, certainly I think we need to just making a comment on your comment. Clearly there is the strategic infrastructure reserve, which is for strategic projects. The concept of using the new LIF in terms of going outside of an immediate community or ward, that's where the comment was raised within the paper. It's not about developing strategic solutions to strategic borough-wide problems. So I think from that point of view, there needs to be a little bit of clarity which says what actually is the level of strategic thinking here. This is not about reinventing the borough's strategic planning and strategic budgeting. It's about dealing with problems which are above the immediate locality and function at a level which may be in multiple communities, but it's not a huge strategic issue. And I'm sorry to be, it's a question of definition of what strategic is. But it is where, for example, I guess something like the cameras can operate across the borough, or it has influences across the borough, so it has a strategic impact, but it's not in the same token as something which might be, you know, such as, I'm trying to pick up an example which is a bit difficult, I suppose, but if you're talking about the much wider strategic development of an area with its infrastructure, roads and water, etc., so it's not aimed at that.
Councillor Harvey.
And I think there is an argument to be made that the council should seriously consider, and I think there would be support for this, I'm sure, that within the main budget, projects like the cameras should be supported anyway. And I think that's a conversation to be had in other places by other people. And I think if that was something that the administration was open to, considering the sums of money that are being talked about for homelessness going forward, that's a different conversation in a different place that could be very productive, I would hope. In the context of the bigger strategic pot, just going back to the regeneration point, we haven't got significant income from either housing grant or from possible sums of money for our housing associations to really follow through on some of those bigger strategic regeneration elements, for example in Buckskin and Southam and Brighton Hill. And those communities aren't being subjected to significant development. And I think we could think out of the box here. And this isn't just about us either. It's about using that money, that 40% that might lever in with both what Sentinel, Sovereign and the others, for example Guinness in Brighton Hill, might consider doing to those areas that would be dramatic improvements to the quality of life for those communities. Now that is an important conversation we could have with the administration, I think cross-party, across all of us, in terms of it's not just one community. I mean, Tadley would reflect on that in some pockets in Tadley as well. Or you could really do something with that 40% that doesn't take away from the bigger projects. It's not stealing money from the Black Dam roundabout project, but genuinely says as an administration, as a council, we're thinking out of the box how we might deal with regeneration looking forward.
Yeah, my memory isn't what it used to be, but there is already a regeneration strategy. Yes, and it did quite a lot of work 2 or 3 years ago on looking at a whole lot of things like antisocial behaviour, the buildings and all, the amount of, I forget the whole but there was a whole range of data which then came up with the target areas for regeneration, which I'm pretty sure 2 out of the 3 were Buckskin and Buckskin and Southampton Extension. And the last time I knew anything about it, which is a while ago now, there was active work going on with the housing associations on how that could be taken forward, and with the presumption that it would involve some of our money, but not, I think, necessarily strategic infrastructure reserve money. So I think there is work going on, and perhaps I'm trying to work out whether it's a community point or a housing point. I mean, we might like to reflect on whether we want to report back here on what the present position is, unless Leslie knows off the top of her head. But it was definitely active work the last time I knew anything about it. But I don't think it's our job here to say, and it should be funded out of this pot or that pot. It would, if there was work to be done, it would be up to the whichever cabinet member it was, to put in the case for releasing the money from whichever reserve it ought to come from.
Just very quickly, Chair, just to respond to that. What I'm saying and what we're saying is, totally respect that. We're not debating that 40% element tonight. It's the other 40% that's in the paper. But what we're saying is, if you just think about what you've just said, Sovereign has now stopped its affordable housing programme, full stop. It stopped because of the situation with the government. Sentinel's it went out onto the exchange and it had a significant pot of money to call on now to carry on with its development programme. The landscape's changed since that report. We've identified the areas. What we haven't addressed is where the money's going to come from. And that's a huge nut to crack if we're serious about regen.
Okay, just curious, would you, as a member, I think, of EPH, are you still, be happy for this committee to take a report on that as a community issue rather than
I mean, I have no place to say such a thing. I am just a simple member of EPH. But, yeah, I mean, if somebody was to look at it, if a committee of this council really wanted to get its teeth into the regen issue, I think we as a group would really welcome that.
Okay, we will, when we come to our work programme, I will take an action point to go away and find out what is happening and whether there is an appropriate point at which we might have a report to this committee. That's not a promise there will be a report. I will go away and find out what we're up to with it. Okay. Anybody, before I try the impossible task of summarising this, would anybody else like to say anything? Okay. This is going to be very hard to summarise, and writing the minutes is going to be incredibly difficult because our minute writer is about to go on holiday, and I think we're going to struggle to capture this. So I think what we probably need to do is capture some fairly high-level thoughts. And the highest level thought is that we would like there to be further discussion with the portfolio holder on all aspects of this before anything is set in stone. I think, and have we time to ask that? What I mean is, are you about to make a decision next week, or have we an opportunity to write up some of all this and think about it further?
I think one thing I've again learned from this is that there is a depth of opinion, and that's rightfully held and fine. I think we would be looking to do some more work on this clearly and come back, and we're thinking about January as being a reasonable time to both come back and see where we're going with that, see if it can go any further, and also that fits perhaps in terms of the wider vein of time of when this would like to, I would personally like to bring this into a position of running, which is probably for the next fiscal year. So from that point of view, yes, it fits to do something in January. We can do that. Okay.
We got the January meeting? Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So I think that you know, I hope the committee would endorse that we would like a lot more work to be done on the basis of what we said tonight. I think that the high-level points I captured, which are things we would like to see more of, we're not persuaded that 20% is the right percentage to lose. And we definitely, I think there's a widespread feeling that 3 years is too rigid, that whilst there might need to be some cut-off where there's no side of the money being spent, we do need to give communities time to find out what the actual needs resulting from the development are. That's just an issue to think. We're not trying to pin you down tonight. This is what we think needs further discussion. I think we'd like a bit more clarity on, a bit more emerging thinking on how any weighting system might work. And not just weighting in terms of weighting towards the communities that have had the development, but I think there was a general feeling we'd want to a bit more about how the whole system would work. Yes, I think I'm getting nods. I thought that was what we were saying. We certainly, I think there's general sympathy for the idea that we should take a much more holistic approach within wards for the money that's there for the existing pot, which you haven't thought about so far, and we'd like to know just how possible that is, and how that can be built into the proactive approach you're planning anyway. Do we want something to come back on borough-wide issues like cameras? Because I'm conscious that there was already, for running costs anyway, there was already a bidding process for people like cameras. They come into the same process as the CAB. So I'm not sure that there's an issue for us here, and that's the only specific example that's been given. Councillor Harvey.
Whether it's an issue for the committee is one thing, whether it's an issue for the fund and how the cabinet member and the cabinet wish to go forward is a different matter, and I wouldn't want their issue, the Camroses issue, to be lost. They're not the only organisation, are they? But that's the one that we've highlighted this evening, so I wouldn't want that to be lost, Chair. And is it the commitment, forgive me, I just understood the cabinet member correctly, that there is no intention to proceed with the decision until you've had all those discussions, and then we can look as to where your direction of travel you may choose to take?
Yeah, I mean, we're not in a decision. This is about bringing it for a conversation to see where we should go with it. There will be a decision in due course, but that's not where we are today.
I'm just trying to check my notes, see if there's anything else we ought to make quite sure we've captured, but I think we will recognise that there was a whole lot more. We're not going to try and attempt, I think, to record everything, but I think I've picked the main feeling on the only thing I haven't really got a feel for. Oh, I think we think more thought needs to be given, and it's part of the weighting of the criteria to exactly what is meant by directly related to development, because we don't want, certainly there was a feeling that you don't want to say it doesn't have, there's no need to show any link at all, because Councillor Simon Band was very worried that then stuff would get spent on things that really weren't what it bred. But on the other hand, we don't want the directly related to development to become an impossible hurdle to have to, you know, that worthy things are cut out on the technicality that you can't prove a direct link between the two of them. So I think we definitely want some more thinking around that. What I didn't really get a feel for was what we thought about the merger of the three funds, but I think what we felt was we can't answer that question until we know a bit more about the answers to the other questions, unless anyone feels we did have a clear. I know there was certain reluctance to merge them, but I suspect that was tied in with not knowing where all the rest of it was going. But do say if I'm wrong about that, because I'm less clear.
Mr. Chair, I wondered, I got more of a feel that we were in agreement that they shouldn't be merged with LIF. Should the other two be merged together and you end up with a grant that looks at something which is more about maintenance rather than new infrastructure and new things, I'm not sure whether we actually had that conversation.
Okay. Does anyone want to say more about that? I'm happy to, to the extent that anybody said anything, they were against merging the three funds. I think that's certainly true. So, but I think you're probably right. I didn't pick up any aversion to merging the other two. And let's say I think we still regard it as an open question as to whether the merger of all three would be worthwhile. It may be the best way of getting some money, but we'll see what comes back in January. Is that? I mean, I know it's been a very useful debate. The debates where you know, trying to create something while you're having the debate are actually the more interesting, but also the more challenging to work out exactly what we've all said. But does anyone feel they've, you know, their thoughts are not being captured? They want to say anything more? I mean, and it will come back in January. Okay, right. We're on, I think, then, the last item on the agenda, which is the work programme, which I better be here in the last page. Thank you very much to the Cabinet Member and to Leslie for their participation in that. I'm sure you don't enjoy the evenings when you're given a lot to think about, but it's been a very useful evening from our point of view. Right, so work programme, we've done the 14th of October. 16th of December, the first item is further discussion on mental health support, including training. I got the wrong name of the form in the last minute. What we need is a topic suggestion form, I'm told. And can I mention Councillor Loney has offered to work with one or two people to put one together, so we can confidently expect we'll have this on the agenda in December. When I've got the form, I will have a discussion with Councillor Loney about exactly, you know, whether we invite anyone else in on the night and what we need to commission for the night. We may have to, on the night, just get the issue started and appoint a scoping group, or we may be able to take it forward. We'll just see what comes on the form and then we'll discuss it. Soft market testing, as you know, the soft market testing of the events concluded there wasn't a market, which was, I think, not the outcome that most people were expecting, but it's clearly the outcome. So now officers are looking at how we handle the events when there isn't a market for someone outside to take them over, and also the Anvil and Haymarket. So both those will come back in December, and I think between those three subjects that will keep us fully occupied in December. We've now added to January feedback on what we've discussed tonight, and the items to be timetabled, we've got food and garden waste, recycling, and the feasibility study on the viability of a youth hub, which will come back when the study is completed. And we have a new item to enter at the request of the Labour group, but it's a very sensible request. Feasibility has been started on the Council Road, the community centres, the Irish Centre, the Carnival Hall, whether they could be replaced with a more modern and probably more useful building nearer the town, even nearer the town centre. No idea what the outcome of that will be, but we have been promised that the result of that feasibility study will come here as a community issue for us to discuss. So I think I'm getting interesting signals from the back, but I think they were humorous rather than a need to do anything. I'm just going to check the time because I can't quite read the clock there. The meeting is now ended at 19 minutes past 9. Thank you very much for your participation.